1. Prim planted a kiss on the squashed face of her cat, Buttercup. I wish I could take you with to the reaping. I wish he could be reaped instead of you. Katniss, dressed in Mother's lovely blue dress, winked just as Prim looked up in horror. Oh don't, Katniss. He'll think we don't like him. She rubbed behind his ears. Just one more kiss. His fur tickled Prim's nose and she giggled. Come on, little duck. Katniss tucked the in back of Prim's blouse, her movements a little jerkier than normal. Prim tried not to squirm, but the pile of worms in her stomach didn't help. What if it's me? Her voice was less than a whisper, more like a thought that escaped in a wayward bubble of sound. Silence. Katniss. Prim looked up. Katniss's Adam's apple bobbed and she ran a hand over Prim's hair. Your name is only in there once. Besides, I'll take care of you. I'll be right there with Mother, watching and protecting you. The Hunger Games. How had Katniss stood through the reapings for 6 whole years and not turned completely grey? Well, if she could do it, so could Prim. 2 kids were going to be sent to the Hunger Games today, and Prim pocketed the 2 goat cheeses she made for the families who'd be mourning the loss. She didn't tell Katniss. Sometimes Katniss viewed Prim's generosity as waste, especially if the goat cheese went to a wealthy family. But Prim couldn't imagine bidding farewell to Katniss or to Mother, or even Buttercup. She had to give the mourners something. Goat cheese helped anything. Maybe, while they sat in the pockets of her skirt, they'd bring her luck at the reaping. Or maybe not. Prim couldn't bear the weight of this moment. She stuck her bottom lip out, hoping a fake pout would loosen the knots in her veins. I wish I was 19, like you, about to get married to a handsome miner. And safe from the reaping. Katniss's light laugh sounded forced. Don't let Gale hear you say that, he might change his mind and marry you instead. Prim made a face. He's too old. Besides, I'd never go hunting with him like you do. Her lip quivered at the memory of when Katniss tried to teach her how to hunt. Her big sister was such a good shot with the bow and arrow, but Prim couldn't bear to see the animals wounded. Time to go. Prim slipped her small hand into Katniss's. Her sister's skin was a lifeline to courage. They reached the square far too soon. Be brave. Be strong. Like Katniss. She tried not to watch as Katniss walked away to stand beside Mother and her fiancé Gale. We'll be apart for only an hour. 1 hour. Prim's chin quivered. What if she was reaped and never got to see the wedding? She filed in line with her classmates and all the other 12-year-olds from District 12. The sun beat down, burning her skin and sending droplets of sweat from her brow to her temples. The other kids in her line stood stiff with wide eyes. Pale, despite their tans. Did Prim look like that? What if she was reaped and she had to, gulp, kill someone in the arena? She couldn't. She'd die first. Prim's eyes flitted upward, despite her attempt to be courageous, until they landed on Katniss again. Deep breath. Katniss was there. Katniss would protect her. The terror was so thick in Prim's mind that she didn't even notice the usual video about Panem's rise to power and the rebellion of District 13. She barely heard the clack of Effie Trinket's beautiful heels as she climbed the platform. She hardly registered, ladies first, until Effie's hand swirled around in the giant fishbowl of names. Then Prim startled from the memory of why she stood in line, of what might come in the next 3 seconds. No. Please. Not me. Not anybody. Effie's manicured fingers latched onto a piece of paper. Prim gasped for breath. It wasn't enough. She needed more air. Her vision swirled, she couldn't bear this tension. Not me. Not me. Effie pulled out the paper, unfolded it, and smiled. Primrose Everdeen. Prim's knees buckled, but the terror evaporated. Now she knew. No more waiting, no more wondering. She was going into the Hunger Games. And she would die. Too. Be strong. Prim clenched her fists at her side and forced her feet to move. The crowd murmured, they didn't sound happy. Each foot she managed to place before the next jolted her body like a gong. It's me. No. The strangled croak could only be Katniss. Prim didn't look. She couldn't look. She'd be strong like her sister. Better that it's me than it is someone else. The thought brought little comfort. Come on up, dear. Effie Trinket held out a hand as Prim reached the platform. Prim used to gape at Effie's clothes, wishing she could wear nice things, or just see them up close. Now they were too close. Prim would rather be back in their dusty house, cuddling dirty old Buttercup, never wearing a nice thing again. No. Katniss screamed. Prim's gaze jerked up to meet her sister's. Katniss clawed toward the platform, but Gale held her back. Peacekeepers marched toward her. They'd hurt Katniss if she didn't stop soon. Prim lifted her chin, holding Katniss's wild gaze. It's okay. It's okay. I can be brave, too. She trembled and took Effie's hand. Her skin was cold and her long nails scraped Prim's palm. If only it were Mom's hand she was holding. Mom stood beside Katniss and Gale, clutching a handkerchief between her hands, paler than all the kids at the reaping. Prim looked away. Well, bravo. Effie clapped alone, the sound echoing until she finally had the sense to stop. The stage felt alone. Prim bit her lip, trying not to look at her friends from school, or at Katniss who had sunk to her knees, or at the drunken Haymitch who didn't seem to realize what was going on. But, as usual, whenever she tried not to think about something, that was the only thing she could think about. And it broke the dam of her strength. Tears escaped, making rivers down Prim's cheeks. She should stop, but she couldn't. She just couldn't. She shoved her hands into the pockets of her skirt and encountered the goat cheeses. She didn't think one would have to go to her family. Effie gave Prim a side hug. Prim couldn't have hugged her back if she'd wanted to. It's time to pick our boy tribute. Effie teetered over to the other glass ball. She whipped out another slip of paper, not taking the time she had with the girls. Maybe she was trying to divert the attention away from Prim. Peter Mellock. Prim didn't know this boy, but he looked old, almost too old to be reaped. The blood drained from his face, his blonde hair stuck to his scalp and he stepped out of line. For a moment, Katniss looked like she'd pass out. Did she know this boy? Or was she still reeling from Prim's reaping? Peter walked on stage with a sigh. Would he be the one to kill Prim in the arena? He looked so kind. He gave Effie a wobbly smile. Just 1 month shy of turning 19. Just my luck. Effie patted him on the shoulder and then the whirlwind began. Peacekeepers whisked Prim into a room and left her alone, locked in. What happened in here? Would they tell her secrets about the games? Would they come question her? And would she ever see Katniss or Mom? The door burst open. Katniss rushed in and grabbed Prim's hand. Quick, Prim, we need to get out of here. Now. Prim reeled back. No, Katniss. But why not? Was it because the idea of fleeing felt even more terrifying? They'll catch us. They'll catch you. She shook her head. Gale and I will take you. Ahem. A peacekeeper stood in the doorway. 5 minutes. Prim launched into Katniss's arms, sobbing into the crook of her shoulder. She shook her head, but words didn't come until she took a great shuddering gasp. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Mom stepped up and wrapped both Katniss and Prim in a hug. Prim couldn't get close enough to them. She wanted to be enveloped, secure, tucked into those warm arms. Take care of Buttercup. Prim swiped her sleeve along her running nose. Poor Buttercup. She hadn't even given him a proper goodbye. I will. Katniss wiped tears from her face. Prim had never seen her cry before. I wanted to take your place, Prim. You know I would. I'm glad you can't. Be strong. I'm glad you get to stay here and get married. You have to live the happy ending for both of us. Katniss groaned and Mom sucked in a shuddering breath. Then, as if accepting Prim's fate, Katniss looked up with steel in her eyes. She clamped her hands around Prim's shoulders and said in a strong, fierce voice, You can survive, Prim. You can. Prim shook her head. I can't. You can. I've shown you how to shoot a couple times. I don't want to, she wailed. I don't want to kill anyone. You don't have to. Katniss stood. You can hide, or pretend to be insane, or scavenge until they've all killed off each other. The peacekeepers waltzed in. Time's up. Wait. Prim pulled the goat cheeses out of her pocket and handed them to Katniss. One for you and one for the Melek family. Something in Katniss's face crumbled at the name Melek. She held the cheese close. That boy, Peter, he'll take care of you, Prim. I know he will. The peacekeeper pulled them out and slammed the door shut on Katniss's I love you. I love you, too, Prim whispered, folding her arms around her middle. Goodbye. Now, she stood utterly alone, wishing she were already dead. 3. Prim stepped into a new world, the capital train, and thought, for a brief moment, that maybe death wouldn't be so bad. She'd never seen so many beautiful things, so many beautiful foods. It was almost like the capital was apologizing for what she had to go through. The nice-looking blonde boy whom Katniss said would take care of her, rubbed his red eyes, but it didn't stop the tears. It's okay. Prim laid a hand on his arm. I cried, too. He gave a humorless laugh, but squeezed her hand anyway. Effie led Prim to her own room, a room on a train. A lovely bed rested against one wall with blankets thicker than Prim's whole body. The shower is in there, Effie pointed at a sleek sliding door, and then these are filled with clothes. Her hand came to rest on a 6-drawer dresser. Wear whatever you like, do whatever you like, but be in the dining car in an hour. She paused before leaving, as if she wanted to say something else, then pursed her lips and walked out. Prim almost asked Effie to stay. No. I'll be strong. Katniss said she'd have volunteered for Prim, if she could. Prim could be strong like her sister, at least until they reached the capital. But with the door closed behind her, no one could see how weak or strong Prim tried to be. She stood in the middle of the room, not moving, until the train started going. It inched forward at first, but then gained speed and didn't stop until Prim was sure they were flying. Her room didn't have a window, but suddenly she wanted to wave goodbye to District 12. It would be the last time she saw it. In a panic, she bolted out of her room back the way she'd come until she reached a tube-shaped window in one of the entry cars. She pressed her face and hands against the glass, but District 12 was gone. Now, there was only countryside. She swallowed a lump in her throat, refusing to say goodbye again. I've never been outside of District 12. Prim whirled around to look up into the face of the blonde boy, Peter. Me neither. Then, without a word, they each returned to their rooms. Prim had a bath that morning before the reaping, so she didn't explore the shower. She had a mental image of what it did, but didn't want to learn just yet. Instead, she opened the dresser drawers. Clothes, beautiful, beautiful clothes just like what Mom had in her special trunk. Only Mom's clothes would always be the prettiest. Prim pulled on a fresh white blouse, high-waisted green pants, and slippers. The slippers were probably for bedtime, but she'd never worn slippers before. Supper came and went and Prim ate far more than she'd ever eaten in a single sitting. Food she'd never hear of nor tasted, but it was divine. Both she and Peter, with full bellies, stumbled after Effie into a different room where a screen replayed the reapings. Prim didn't want to watch, but forced herself to. One of these people would kill her. It wouldn't be Peter. Katniss trusted him, so Prim would too. Why did Katniss trust him? Names flew across the screen: Cato, Clove, Marvel, Glimmer, on and on and on. They all looked old, like Peter. Prim gripped the loose material of her pants into tiny bunches in her fists. Would she be the youngest? The smallest? The weakest? The most frightened? Some of the tributes even looked happy to be reaped. But when it showed District 11, Prim noticed a girl her age with brown skin and curly dark hair. Her name was Rue. That girl, Prim was certain, would be a new friend. That is, if friends could be made in a competition of murder. 4. You're not going to survive. These were Haymitch's first words to Prim. He, Prim, Effie, and Peter sat around a mahogany table with another hot capital meal in front of them. Prim's hand hovered midway to her mouth. She looked into Haymitch's scruffy face. I know. You don't need to frighten her. Peter set his water glass down with a clunk. It's your job to teach us how to survive. If you're labeling us as failures already, then our failure will be your fault. Peter said us as if he considered her as a teammate. But he shouldn't. Haymitch is right, Peter. I don't want to kill people. Well, neither do I, but I want to survive. I still want to learn everything I can. Was Katniss right? That she could survive. Maybe even without killing someone. She dare not hope. Not yet. Haymitch rolled his eyes and swigged from a flask. Survive. Learn. Friendship. How about some candy and bubble baths, too? You're both pathetic. Prim leaped to her feet, her fists at her sides. No, we're not. Just because we don't want to murder people doesn't mean we're weak. You have no idea what's going to happen once you enter that arena, Haymitch growled. You're going to become a monster, yes, even you, little blue-eyed sweetheart. His eyes lost focus for a moment. Everyone does. Peter punched him in the jaw. Effie screamed and Prim plopped back into her seat. Haymitch fell on his back on the ground, yanking the tablecloth with him. Dishes clattered to the floor. Prim's startled gaze flitted from Haymitch to Peter. Even though his hand was still in a fist and a muscle in his clenched jaw pulsed, she trusted him. Once the chaos settled, Haymitch rubbed his jaw. Not us. Peter breathed heavily. We won't become monsters. Well. Effie huffed. Those were monstrous manners, young man. She waved a hand toward a servant woman with long red hair and white clothing. Without a word, the woman came and started picking up the broken dishes. Haymitch propped himself up on his elbows, glaring at Peter. Peter glared back. Then Haymitch started to laugh. Was he insane? Drunk? Prim glanced at Peter, he looked just as confused. At least you've got a little muscle. Haymitch crawled back into his chair. I'm not convinced you're survivors yet. Peter opened his mouth as if to retort, but Haymitch held up a finger. But, I'll teach you what I can, on one condition. He looked pointedly at each of them. You do whatever I say. Then you have to stay sober. Peter's jaw relaxed. Haymitch waved away the statement. Fine, fine. Deal. Peter nodded. Prim nodded, too, only she wouldn't kill anyone. On their way to bed, Prim and Peter found themselves alone in the corridor. Prim wanted to ask if Peter knew Katniss. She wanted to talk about Katniss, about how much she'd miss her, about how strong she was, about how she wanted to be like Katniss. But that was the wrong type of focus. Prim stopped at her door and looked up at Peter. I'm not going to kill you. He stopped walking, but didn't look at her. Then, in a quiet voice, don't make promises you can't keep. I don't. She lifted her jaw to show her seriousness. She'd keep this one. Katniss trusted this boy, and if Katniss trusted him, Prim would never do anything to harm him. He gave her a small smile. Good night, Prim. He continued down the hall and disappeared into his room. She watched him go, the peaceful feeling in her chest dissipating like thin liquid under summer heat. She couldn't help but notice. He didn't promise not to kill her. 5. Prim lay on her back in her room, imagining herself stabbing someone to death. She almost heaved at the idea. But her mind wouldn't let it go. Every scene from every past Hunger Games flitted across her memory, only this time she was the one killing someone. She clamped her fists over her eyes. No. She will become a monster like Haymitch said. Even if Peter ended up killing her after all, she didn't mind. She'd survive as long as she could, to make Katniss happy, and that's all she could do. Katniss would want her to fight, but what skills did Prim have? Ah yes, something different to focus on. Skills. Skill 1, she knew how to make cheese. So if they were in an arena full of tame goats, she'd do great. She rolled her eyes. Okay, next. Skill 2, she knew how to heal wounds. Not as well as Mom, but still, no one else her age could stitch a gash or draw infection from an old injury. She'd be able to keep herself alive if someone ever wounded her. Perhaps that could come in handy, get injured, fake dead, and then heal herself. As crazy as the idea sounded, she wouldn't write it off. What else? How would she eat? Katniss herself admitted that Prim wasn't a hunter. However, Prim had helped draw pictures in Mother's apothecary book. Father had added other entries to the book, entries of plants used for food. Prim knew most of those. It was one of her favorite memories with Katniss, poring over the pages late into the night. Learning how to live off the land. Feeling like a grown-up. I bet no one else knows about plants like Katniss and I do. What were Mom and Katniss doing right then? Was Katniss still crying? Was Gale trying to comfort her? Did Rory, Gale's brother, miss Prim? He was the only boy she ever liked. For now, she'd imagined that he liked her back. Underscore 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 underscore. Sleeping without Mom, Buttercup, or Katniss left Prim dizzy and bleary-eyed in the morning. She cried for a good hour before crawling out of bed. Today they'd arrive at the capital. She wasn't ready. She'd never be ready. Everyone was already assembled in the dining car. Prim slid into her seat, staring at the breakfast of eggs, ham, fried potatoes, rolls, fruit. If only she could somehow share this with Katniss and Mom. Buttercup would love the ham. Had he ever tasted ham before? Have some hot chocolate. Peter slid a mug of steaming, creamy dark liquid toward her. It smelled good. She took a tentative sip. Liquid comfort slid down her throat, calming her stomach and nerves. If anything could make her feel better about the games, it was hot chocolate. So, what are your skills? Haymitch shoved a moose-sized bite of eggs into his mouth. The cocoa in Prim's mouth turned to mud. Suddenly the previous night's self-evaluating didn't seem to amount to much. I haven't got any skills. Peter stirred his cocoa, then licked the spoon. Unless the arena is a bakery. Okay, so first we'll work on your confidence level, muscles. Then I'll ask you about your skills again. Haymitch turned to Prim. And you? She forced a swallow. I can heal wounds and find edible plants. Her voice ended in a squeak. Haymitch rolled his eyes and she turned her gaze back to the cocoa. What did it matter what he thought of her? It was clear they all knew she'd die. And you're a fast runner, Peter piped up. Probably faster than a lot of us older kids. So you'll be a hider. The way Haymitch said this made Prim feel ashamed. A hider. It sounded so pathetic. Just like what he predicted she'd be. Prim looked up at Peter, resisting the urge to give in to Haymitch's ribbing. How do you know I'm a fast runner? Katniss always bragged on you at school. He wouldn't meet her gaze. One day there was a race in your class. I could hear her cheering for you all the way across the schoolyard, so I went to see what the fuss was about. That's when I saw you run. You won the race, yards and yards ahead of the boys. You're good. Katniss bragged on her. Prim's chest swelled. I guess I am pretty fast. She expected Haymitch to roll his eyes again, but he surveyed her. That could work to your advantage. The cornucopia is usually a bloodbath, but speed could get you in and out before the bloodbath starts. Her hands shook. The cornucopia. The place where every kid got sliced to ribbons. She couldn't run into that. Haymitch gestured to her face. Well, there goes that idea. You look like you're gonna puke. She felt like it, too. If you're going to turn into a limp noodle at the very mention of trying to survive, you might as well just step onto a landmine before the countdown. Prim startled. Now there was an idea. Step off her little platform before the countdown. She'd blow up, it'd be mostly painless, and she wouldn't have to wait for someone else to kill her. Yes, that would work very well. Thank you, Haymitch. Finally, she had a plan. 6. You're not going to like what they're going to do to you. Haymitch circled Prim and Peter like a vulture. But you're going to do whatever your stylists tell you. Prim shrugged. Okay. What did it matter? She'd be blown up in a few days, no matter how pretty the stylists made her. The train entered a tunnel. She and Peter ran to the window. In a moment we'll see the capital. Prim didn't share Peter's excitement, though she was curious about the clothes that capital people wore. Then, there it was. The capital full of people wearing the brightest clothing Prim had ever seen. High heels, frills, ribbons, makeup. Despite some of the odd appearances, Prim sighed. She couldn't help but love the idea of beautiful clothing. Buildings stretched taller than the clouds, polished stone wound as pathways through alleys and buildings. What a place, what a magical, surreal, wonderland of a place. She tried to ignore the fact the people here would cheer on her death. Onlookers pointed at the train and Prim ducked below the windowsill, but Peter remained, nose against the glass, waving at them. How could he wave? It was so intimidating with everyone looking at them like that. Why are you waving? She whispered up at him. He shrugged. You never know, one of them may be rich. Oh yeah. Sponsors. Well, Prim didn't want anyone to waste money on her, not when she planned to explode into smithereens. Underscore 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 underscore. Prim's fascination with the odd people of the capital disappeared when three humans, were they human? Demanded she strip down. Two women and one man, though their painted skin and squeaky voices made her think of them as mechanical toys. Human-sized toys who wanted her naked. And for some reason, it didn't bother them at all. Their names were Venia, Olivia, and Flavius. They bubbled over Prim, but no matter their kindness, she wouldn't take off her clothes. She'd never been naked before except when taking a bath. But Mom and Katniss didn't count. Why? Can't you just do what you need to with my clothes on? My dear, you're a hairy beast. Octavia squealed. Prim hugged her arms around herself and Venia stepped close with her hand outstretched. Prim was so nervous that she'd tear the clothes right off her that she screamed. Venia recoiled and looked at Octavia with wild eyes. Why did she do that? I'm not going to hurt her. Go away. Tears burned Prim's eyes. I want Katniss. The plea came out in a croak and she was ashamed that such weakness escaped. But these crazy prep people wouldn't understand anyway. We'll just get Cinna. Flavius's orange curls bounced as he hustled the two women out. Prim was left alone in the sterile room, trying not to feel guilty for her behavior. Haymitch told her to do whatever they wanted, but did he expect this? Did he have to do this when he competed in the games? The prep team was kind enough, but all of this was too new. Too new for Prim to handle. After 10 minutes, they crept back into the room. She backed against the wall, but Venia held out her hands. Don't worry, dear. Cinna said to let you keep your clothes on. We'll just work around them. Prim crunched the material in her fists. Promise. Flavius nodded encouragingly. His orange corkscrew locks bounced so crazily, that Prim smiled. I'm sorry, I'm just not used to this. Would you mind wearing a robe instead? Octavia asked in a soft, tentative voice. She held out a fluffy lavender robe. All right. Prim took it from her, running her fingers over the soft material. She changed in a separate room and then returned to them, lying on a table. They went to work, hesitant at first, probably afraid she'd scream again. But she didn't. They seemed kind at heart. I like your skin color, she told Octavia, who then blushed and took to brushing her hair with sweet, mother-like strokes. When it was all finished and the prep team left, Prim felt like a hairless cat under her robe. But she also felt prettier. They'd filed her fingernails into delicate round ovals, trimmed her eyebrows, and brushed her hair full of soft chemicals. What would Katniss think when she saw Prim on screen? Prim swallowed. Katniss. Katniss would be watching every second of the games, inches from the screen, watching over Prim. Cheering for Prim. It was this mental picture, of Katniss hunching in front of the television screen, a look of focus as she mentally urged Prim on, that ruined Prim's plan. She couldn't jump onto a landmine. Katniss would be crushed. Prim couldn't do that to her. She had to fight. She didn't want to, but she had to, for Katniss. The last gift Prim could give to anyone in this world was a fighting spirit and hope. Perhaps that was worth a little suffering in the arena. The door opened and a young dark-skinned man walked in. Gold lined his eyelids, but aside from that he looked perfectly normal. "Hello, Prim. I'm Cinna, your stylist." "Hi. I'm sorry the prep team frightened you earlier. I can imagine how strange all of this must feel. I'm new here, too." Prim instantly liked Cinna's soft manner, his kind eyes. "You are?" He nodded. "I'm honored to represent District 12 and, even though I can't help you in the games, I plan to help you as much as possible in the days before they start." Prim followed him into a sitting room where they ate lunch. Meanwhile, Cinna talked about his plans for Prim's clothing. "You're a soft flower and I want to capture that innocence through your clothing. You're brave, too, and I think we can capture that as well." Soft. Brave. How could those two things go together? After lunch, Prim was dressed in her District 12 outfit. It fit snugly and, even though she'd be engulfed in flames soon, she felt safe. Covered head to toe. Peter arrived in a matching outfit and they climbed onto the carriages that would take them into the opening ceremonies. Prim wanted to pet the horses, but wasn't sure she was allowed to. "You okay?" Peter asked her. Goodness, she felt small next to him. She nodded, but a lump had formed in her throat as the tributes from District 1 rode out in their own chariot, wearing glittering jewel-encrusted tunics. Soon everyone would be looking at her. She didn't feel safe anymore. Peter slid his hand around hers and she startled. When she looked up, she met his eyes and they were smiling, in a nervous sort of way. "It's okay. I'm here." In that moment, their outfits burst into flames. Prim screamed and clutched Peter's hand. They hadn't started moving yet, but the fire eradicated any calm she'd had before. Cinna shouted from across the way, "Remember, heads high. Smiles. They are going to love you." Prim's breaths came quicker. She tried not to focus on the fire, but it was all around her. It didn't burn, though. In fact, she felt nothing. Peter squeezed her hand as their chariot rolled forward. "Prim." He leaned down and whispered in her ear as they entered the city. "I'll take care of you, Prim. I promise." 7. District 12. District 12. District 12. Prim glanced up at the chanting crowd. They were cheering for her. No, probably for Peter. Anyone could see she wasn't worth much. Or maybe they were just cheering because Cinna's costume design was so illuminating. Prim caught a glimpse of herself on the television screen. Next to Peter, she looked small, minuscule, but like an explosive little fireball. It was so bizarre to see herself so huge and fiery. She almost felt proud. "Just imagine it's Katniss cheering you on at the race," Peter said in her ear. Katniss would be proud. The last time Prim saw her, Katniss called her Little Duck, but now Prim imagined what she might call her instead. Fire Duck popped into her head and it was so absurd, so silly, that Prim laughed out loud. On the television screen, her laugh made her look insane, like she enjoyed burning alive. It made her laugh harder. Maybe she was insane. No other tributes had thought about blowing themselves up to avoid the games. Besides, the capital people seemed to like insane. They roared their approval. The chariots looped the city circle and pulled up beneath President Snow's mansion. Prim had never seen President Snow, nor did she want to. He stepped onto the balcony, small, thin, with off-white hair. After a quick welcome, the anthem played and the horses returned of their own accord into the training center. Cinna gave Prim a hand down from the chariot. Only then did she realize she'd been gripping Peter's hand like a vice the whole ride. His fingers were red from lack of circulation. "I'm sorry," she told him over her shoulder. He just smiled and she remembered his words, "I'll take care of you, Prim. I promise." She believed him. But why? Why did Katniss trust him? Why did he want to protect Prim? underscore 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 underscore. Prim threw up on the elevator in the training center. She'd never been more embarrassed in her life. How could she handle a 2-day train ride, a chariot ride, being lit on fire and stripped of all her body hair, but not an elevator ride? Maybe it was just because the drop of her stomach felt a little too familiar to when she first stepped on the platform with Effie, having just been reaped. You poor dear. Effie hustled Prim to her room so fast that she had very little time to take in the elaborate 12th level designed specifically for her and Peter. Her room was bigger than her entire house in District 12. Effie swept her straight into the shower. Just take a nice soak and then come out for dinner. Prim did as commanded, though it took her a while to figure out all the gadgets on the shower panel. Once the water started spewing from overhead with pink bubbles swirling in the air, she sat on the ground and let it pelt her like an angry rainstorm. Here she could think. She could digest. She was in the capital. It was so easy to get distracted by the finery, the people, the instant fame and the outfits. But the fact remained that she would be in the arena in just a few days and she still hadn't settled on a plan. To blow up or to not blow up. If only she'd asked Katniss not to watch the games this year, then she's never see Prim's struggle with cowardice. But cowardice wasn't the worst of it. When Prim really thought about it, really looked at her situation, she was struck by the knowledge she would be dead in a few days. Dead. Gone. No more running. No more Buttercup. No more Mom brushing her hair and then braiding it. No more hopes of Rory Hawthorne holding her hand. No more milking life felt too short and Prim felt too grown up. She didn't want to think about death. Not yet. A rap on the door startled her. Time for dinner, dear. Effie. Dinner. What did it matter? I'll be right there. Prim crawled back to her feet. Effie was so nice to her, she couldn't let her down. Not while she still had a couple days to make someone happy. Dinner was served on a long table with Peter, Haymitch, Effie, Portia, and Cinna all present. Prim sat next to Peter. He passed her a plate and then a man in a long white tunic served her some greyish soup, vegetables with teensy tomatoes, roast beef and noodles. After serving the food, his hand slipped up and placed a small primrose on her napkin. Prim gasped and a smile spread across her face. Thank you. The tunic man looked at her, startled, and she wondered if she did something wrong. Prim. Effie set her wine glass on the table. You're not to speak to Avoxes unless it's to give an order. But. Her fingers toyed with the primrose. Maybe the man had been ordered to give it to her. Maybe it wasn't just a gift from him. What's an Avox? She watched as the man bowed and backed away. Sweat lined his forehead. Did she get him in trouble? Someone who committed a crime. They cut their tongues out so they can't speak, said Haymitch. Prim's throat stuck and her eyes burned. She had an abrupt urge to get up from the table and give the poor Avox man a hug. She looked at him, but he stared at his feet, holding a water pitcher like a statue. Shall we move into the sitting room? Cinna suggested. Everyone else at the table grasped the escape. They stood with their chairs scraping against the floor. Prim rose last, still stunned. Cutting out people's tongues. Peter lingered behind to walk with her, but she couldn't just leave. Not with those last words hanging in the air, they cut their tongues out so they can't speak. What did it matter what Effie thought? What Haymitch thought? Or what the Capitol thought? She tipped around to the Avox and threw her arms around his middle. He didn't respond. Didn't move. A small groan came from deep within his throat and that's when she pulled away. She didn't want to get him in trouble. She looked up at his face, not minding that tears streamed down her own. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that anybody ever hurt you. Come on, Prim. Peter sounded tense. The voices in the sitting room grew louder, as if someone was coming back for them. A single tear slipped down the Avox man's cheek. I wish I knew your name, she whispered to him. But I'll think of you fondly, anyway. 8. The moment Prim stepped into the training room, she almost spun on her heel and walked out again. Peter took her by the arm. "No you don't. Come on, if I have to, you have to." He seemed stronger when he had to lead her and be courageous for her. Maybe he needed her in there with him so he wouldn't get nervous. Okay. Prim scanned the other tributes who dispersed to the different stations. They were huge. All of them. And confident. "Where's that girl who's my age? What was her name?" "Rue." Rue was nowhere to be seen. Maybe she left the arena like Prim had wanted to. Prim's stomach sank like the miner's elevator. She'd so desperately wanted to find a friend. Sure, Peter could be called friend, but she didn't know him and he was old. More like Big Brother material. Then again, maybe this was for the best. If Prim became friends with Rue, they'd have to watch each other die. Or maybe Rue would have to kill Prim. Or something. She spent most of the day at the edible plants station, learning about the ones she hadn't heard of. Then she went to the healing station and learned about different ways to splint, bind, and treat wounds using nature. Much of this she already knew, but she caught a few new tricks she'd never thought of before. Mom would love to know about these. That was her favorite station. She'd return to it tomorrow. Peter hunkered down at the camouflage station. Prim wanted to join him, but didn't want him to feel like he had to focus on her. The weapon sat on the other side of the room, beckoning. Taunting her. "No, I won't be a killer." But part of her, a tiny little itchy part in the palm of her hand, wanted to pick up a dagger, just to see how it felt. By training day number 2, Prim had learned everything she could from the instructors at the healing station and edible plants station. In fact, she taught them a few things. She gave them smiles, figuring none of the other tributes did that. These poor instructors had to train kids they knew would be dying in a couple days. Prim still hadn't connected with Rue. She thought she glimpsed her at one point, toying with a dagger, but when Prim looked again, she wasn't there. Prim went from station to station, learning about building shelters and camouflage and fish hooks. For some reason, the idea of catching and killing a fish didn't bother her as much as the idea of catching and killing a deer, or a rabbit, or something fluffy and cuddleable. Besides, fish could be eaten raw. Perhaps she should learn about snares and fishing hooks, just in case. As she settled at the station, a realization struck her like a lightning bolt. "I'm thinking like a survivor." It terrified her. Was she really hoping to survive? Underscore 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 underscore. "Look, sweetheart, you've got to pick up a weapon today." Haymitch picked at his teeth as they rode the elevator down to the training area. It was the last day and then they'd be performing in front of the game makers, dressing for an interview, and then off to the arena. What did it matter? What could she learn in one day? Prim started to shake her head, but Haymitch cut her off. "You promised to do whatever I tell you. Now get in there and learn to throw a dagger, shoot a bow and arrow, something." Prim just stared at the elevator doors, silent. Haymitch threw his hands in the air. "Why do I even try? It's your funeral. Don't expect me to attend unless I get to put 'I told you so' on the tombstone." The doors opened and they walked into the training arena once more. For the first time, Prim spotted Rue. She hovered by the weapons, inspecting each one with a brush of her small dark fingers. Without a word to Haymitch or Peter, Prim dashed across the room, keeping her eyes locked on the other girl so she wouldn't lose her. Then, realizing she was attracting stares from the other tributes, particularly a burly one named Kato, she veered a little to her right so she ended up at the wall of daggers. She plucked one off the wall and tested the sharpness of the blade with her fingernail, as if this had been her intent the whole time. A quick glance showed her Haymitch, still in the elevator, staring at her with a slack jaw. Peter nudged Haymitch with his elbow, grinned, and then jogged toward the climbing station. Once everyone was sufficiently distracted, Prim slid closer to Rue. Rue looked up and gave a brilliant smile. "Hi. What a surprise." She wasn't afraid. "Hello." Prim put the dagger back up on the wall. I'm Prim. I'm Rue. Rue's fingers stopped on a slingshot and she pulled it off the wall. Prim wanted to say I know, but that might be off-putting. We both have the names of flowers, did you know that? An obvious sign they were destined to be friends. Yeah. Rue's timid eyes stayed on the slingshot. Prim wanted to put her at ease. She wanted to tell her that she wouldn't kill her, but the very idea of talking about killing seemed too harsh, especially when they'd just met. I liked your outfit at the opening ceremonies. Rue looked up, meeting Prim's eyes. She let out a gushed giggle. I thought you were on fire. I did, too, for a moment. Prim noticed Haymitch watching her with narrowed eyes. By now, he'd figured out she didn't run to the weapons because she wanted to hold a dagger. So she copied Rue and pulled a slingshot off the wall. It was light and comfortable in her hand. Even though she'd never used one before, she felt safer. Want to go practice? Rue grabbed a bucket of stones. Prim shrugged. All right. She picked up one end of the bucket to lighten it for Rue and they headed to target practice. On their left, Clove, the girl from District 2, threw daggers one after the other and hit the bullseye every time. Another guy, Marvel, Prim thought his name was, showed the same amount of accuracy with a spear. An instructor showed both Prim and Rue how to hold the slingshot and they spent the rest of the afternoon practicing. When they ran out of rocks, the instructor brought them a bucket of little colored balls that exploded with a splash of paint when they hit the target. This helped the girls improve their direct aim. Once, when one of her balls didn't explode on impact, Prim ran forward to retrieve it. A sharp pop stung her leg and she startled, glancing back at Rue. Rue was doubled over in giggles, her slingshot in one hand. A yellow splash of paint marked Prim's leg. Prim loaded her slingshot with the pink ball she'd retrieved and let it fly. It hit Rue on the forehead, sending a spray of pink paint into her curly black hair. They laughed harder, loud enough that now people noticed. The instructor from that station ran over, pale. No attacking other tributes. Rue covered her mouth with her arm and Prim managed to take a deep breath. She jogged back to the aiming line and avoided Rue's eye for risk of losing control. Still, with every shot, they each let out a little giggle. And that's when Prim knew, Rue would never kill her. 9. The private session with the game makers would be a joke. Prim could hardly wait to get it over with, and yet she didn't know what to do. Peter and Haymitch kept hissing words of advice like, show them your sprint. Or use the slingshot. Or don't screw this up, sweetheart, or you're dead. Rue and Prim didn't say anything to each other. What would Rue do for her demonstration? Too bad she and Prim couldn't go in together. Prim's name was finally called, she was last to go in and the game makers didn't seem to care. They teetered around from too much wine, joking with each other. Some looked her way, but Prim didn't care. She didn't run. She didn't shoot. She just stood stock still in the middle of the gymnasium, like a statue of defiance. Unmoving. Unsmiling. Trying not to quiver under the new gazes she received. This was her own act of defiance and strength. Defiance can be bravery, too, she thought, hoping Katniss wouldn't be ashamed of her. 10 minutes passed. By that point, the game makers had surfaced from their wine glasses and simply watched her. Funny, how standing still performing no skill whatsoever could be more interesting to them than anything else she tried. So what if she got ranked low? So what if Haymitch blew a cap because she wasn't trying the way he wanted her to? 1 minute left, Miss Everdeen, a game maker, announced. At this, she turned on her heel to face them all fully. With a small bow that almost collapsed her shaking knees, she said, "Thank you for your consideration, but I will not be killing anyone for your games." Then she walked out with stiff forced steps, just as nervous as when her name was first pulled from the fishbowl by Effie Trinket. How did it go? Peter asked the moment Prim stepped onto the 12th floor. Prim shook her head. She didn't want to tell him. Now, outside of the private session, she didn't feel brave at all. In fact, she felt like a coward, ashamed of her refusal to perform for the game makers. Ashamed to admit to Peter that she didn't even try. Haymitch would be furious. They joined the adults around the elaborate meal table, snacking on fruits and wine and a cheese plate. Everything tasted like coal dust in Prim's mouth. The adults chit-chatted about the weather and other small talk. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe Prim could get away without admitting what she'd done. But that wouldn't help. The game makers would announce the scores live tonight, and then Effie and Haymitch and Cinna and Peter and Rue would all see how awful Prim did. Okay, enough small talk, just how bad were you today? Haymitch asks. Prim choked on her strawberry. I don't know that it matters much. Peter jumped in. They were all bored and half drunk by the time I got in. I threw around some heavy objects until they told me I could go. And you, sweetheart, said Haymitch. Prim couldn't meet his gaze. She couldn't tell him. I was brave for the first time in my life. I stood up to them. I showed them I could be strong in my own way. I didn't do anything. Her nose burned and tears pooled on the rims of her eyes. Don't expect much from my score. Scores only matter if they are very good, anyway. Portia's attempt to smooth over Prim's confession gave Prim the moment she needed to compose herself. No one pays much attention to the bad or mediocre ones. For all they know, you could be hiding your talents to get a low score on purpose. People use that strategy. Well, a low score won't get you any sponsors. Haymitch ruined the comfort that came from Portia's words. Well, let's go in and see. Cinna offered Prim his arm. She grinned, took it, and they walked into the sitting room to watch the scores. Cinna and Peter, Prim's two heroes. Not just because they were kind to her, but because she believed they genuinely cared. The career tributes, as Haymitch called the beefy fierce ones, all got 8s, 9s, and 10s. Prim's stomach sank lower and lower the closer they got to hers. Rue got a 7 and Prim let out a small cheer, which attracted a few odd looks from Portia, Effie, and Haymitch. Prim wasn't about to explain that Rue was her friend. They didn't approve of friends in the arena. Peter got an 8 and suddenly Prim was chewing on her fingernails and clenching her stomach. There was her face, her light blonde hair woven back with dainty braids. Below the picture, a number surfaced, rotating on its base, and Prim couldn't block out the gasp that escaped Effie's mouth. The game makers had given her a 1. 10. Prim was worthless. Completely worthless. No one said a thing in response to her score of 1. Not a single other tribute had gotten a 1. The next lowest score was a 4. A 4. Haymitch watched her with narrowed eyes. Was he angry? She waited for him to say something, to attack her character or to give her up as a lost cause. Instead, he said, well, we'll just have to work extra hard to prep you for your interview. That didn't help much. What good was an interview when she'd already stamped herself with failure? What is Katniss thinking? Prim crawled into bed and, because no one could see her, she hoped, she pulled the blanket over her head and hid. A secret place. She imaged herself back home, just for a moment. A small luxury. She could almost feel the weight of Buttercup's fluffy body settling in for the night at her feet. She pretended, for one long breath, that she wouldn't be in the arena in 2 days. She'd be home, with Mom and Katniss. All would be right. The next morning, Prim woke to reality. It punched her in the gut and she couldn't help sniffling through the morning. But, with a firm breath and renewed determination, she started training for her interview with Effie. They went to Prim's room where Effie handed Prim a full-length gown and high heels. Prim reached for the dress with careful fingers. Finally she'd be wearing the beautiful clothing of the capital, not the overly colored clothes or the weird dyes, but something elegant and beautiful. She sighed and Effie helped her into the dress. It was too long and the heels too high, but Prim couldn't help the enormous smile that spread over her face as she teetered in front of the mirror. Look at me, she squealed. You, my dear, are a natural. Effie's hands were clasped in front of her and she looked ready to hug Prim. They spent the next 4 hours working out the details of etiquette. Never hold the dress above the ankle. Straighten the knee when taking steps in the heels. Don't blink too much. Don't adjust the top with every movement. So much to remember. Halfway through, Effie switched Prim's high heels out for a shorter heel. That goes better with your age, dear. Prim didn't complain. As lovely as the high heels were, They were difficult to walk in and they pinched her feet. How did Effie do it every day? Prim went through a million different smiles, 100 different polite phrases that felt odd on her tongue, and practiced her curtsy until she felt sure her knees wouldn't hold her up another minute. Excellent. They'll absolutely love you. Effie helped Prim out of the dress. Prim put back on her training clothes and slid her feet into her fuzzy slippers. But she stopped at the door. She didn't want to go practice with Haymitch. What would he make her do? Say, Effie patted her on the back. Off you go. He won't bite. You'll do fine. Why didn't she sound confident? Prim stepped through the door and past Peter in the hallway. He winked at her. Okay, he survived. Effie was right, Prim would be fine. Hey sweetheart, Haymitch drawled as she walked into the dining room. Hungry? Prim nodded and plopped into a seat across from him, helping herself to a roll. Haymitch watched her eat until every bite felt like swallowing a river rock. She avoided his gaze. Was he going to comment on her awful training score? It didn't matter, she didn't regret her actions. She was proud of herself. Katniss would be proud, she'd know Prim did something meaningful, like stand up to the game makers, wouldn't she? Even though it's not what Katniss would have done. Right now, people like you because you're innocent. Prim looked up from her half-eaten roll. Haymitch continued surveying her. But that's not enough to get them on your side, to get them to sponsor you. They like you, but no one thinks you're a survivor. He leveled his gaze. Are you a survivor, Prim? She shook her head. No. Well, at least you're honest. He scratched just under the hairline on his forehead. What are you surviving for? Prim frowned. I'm not going to survive. He rolled his eyes. I'm not talking about your chances of survival. I'm talking about what's driving you. If you could survive, why does it matter? Prim reminded herself that he wasn't attacking her character. He was prompting her, helping her, in preparation for her interview. For Katniss. And for Mom. And for Buttercup, but she wasn't about to tell him that. Why? Because Katniss loves me and it would kill her if I died. Her throat closed for a moment. Why? Because I'm her only sister. We take care of each other. But Katniss had Gale now. She'd be fine. That's better, family bonding. They got her screams on camera, so we could run with that. Katniss would hate that. She'd hate seeing her weakness displayed for the world to see. But she couldn't stop it now, she already had to watch Prim go into the games, so her pride was probably the last thing on her mind. Tell me about your mother. Prim didn't want to talk about Mom. She didn't want to reveal that Mom had cocooned herself in her sorrow for years, or that she was probably doing the same thing now that Prim was gone. She's a healer. She helps people get better when they're sick. She's strong, at least she was strong, at one point, and brave. I look just like her and everyone says she's the prettiest woman in District 12. Good, good. Haymitch was smiling now. He continued to ask her about her family, about Buttercup, about Lady Hergoat. The more Prim talked, the more she calmed. There was power in her story, in her family. It revived her. But it also made her want to survive. The next day arrived in a swirl of color and clothing. The prep team popped into Prim's room before she was even awake. She yanked the covers up to her chin with a squeak, but they didn't seem to mind. They were gushing about her upcoming interview, and how amazing she looked on the chariot. No one said anything about her low score. Cinna swept in once Prim was showered, primed, and make-upped. He took one look at her face and then thanked the prep team. I'll take it from here. They swept out with squeals, waves, and parting shouts like, we'll see you at the interview. Good luck, darling one, and you're stunning. Once gone, Cinna touched up her makeup, meaning he wiped most of it off and fixed it so that Prim looked like herself once again. You're so beautiful all on your own, you hardly need any makeup. Prim smiled at him, wishing for a moment he'd give her a hug. A warm, firm hug like father used to give. Instead, he unzipped a bag on a hanger, revealing a knee-length silk-layered dress the color of cream with yellow accents. It's just like a primrose, she whispered, running her fingers down the soft, fragile material. I'd hoped you'd notice. The people of the capital don't know quite as much about gardening, but the color just seemed to match your gentle spirit perfectly. He smiled with such genuineness his gold eyeliner crinkled. The neckline was a wave of dips and curls, ending in two thin straps that capped over her shoulders. The glistening heels had barely any lift and were easy to walk in while still feeling elegant. Prim twirled and watched the dress billow around her in the mirror. She loved it. It was perfect, and she still felt like herself. Are you ready? Prim nodded and Cinna helped her out of her room and into the elevator. Peter looked dashing in a suit and Prim wondered again, for a moment, how he and Katniss knew each other. The elevator descended and spilled them out near the back of the stage. Prim's heart fluttered and she secretly celebrated the fact she wouldn't have to go on stage until after all the other tributes except Peter. They filed on stage and took their seats. She caught Rue's eye, who wore a lovely gossamer gown, and gave a little wave. Rue waved back. She sat 2 seats down from Prim with the beefy Thresh in between them. Thresh was so huge, Prim leaned back in her chair and couldn't bring herself to try and whisper around him, fun compliments to Rue. If only she and Rue were sitting next to each other. Caesar Flickerman bounded on stage in his shiny blue suit with the thousands of electric blue twinkle stars. After a few jokes, he gets right into the 3-minute interviews. District 1 went first, then 2, then 3, and so on. Each tribute spoken seemed to have an angle on how they approached the interview, but none of them seemed real. Everything was show. And the closer it got to Prim's turn, the more she wanted to be real, to show people who she truly was as a last goodbye to life. Rue's turn came and she floated up next to Caesar. She was all smiles and Prim envied her easy confidence. You got a 7 in your performance for the Game Makers. What would you say your greatest strengths are, Rue? Caesar asked. Or would you prefer not to tell? He grinned mischievously. I'm hard to catch, she said in her soft musical voice. And if they can't catch me, they can't kill me. So don't count me out. I wouldn't in a million years. She flounced back to her seat and threw Prim a huge smile. For a wonderful, blissful 3 minutes while Thresh was on stage with Caesar, Rue and Prim were separated by only a seat. You did great. Prim said as quietly as she could. Thanks. You look so pretty. Like a flower. Prim looked down at her dress and smoothed out the layers. Then she jumped when her name was called. Thresh was already done. She tried not to choke, or trip, or faint, as she stood from her seat. Caesar held out a hand for her. Grateful, she took it and he gave her a single twirl. You look absolutely radiant. Prim giggled and her giggle rebounded off the walls of the stands, suddenly amplified. It's because I'm a primrose. Yes, you certainly are. And somehow, on the screen behind them, a beautiful primrose flower flashed. Prim could practically smell it. So, Prim, the capital must be quite a change from District 12. What's impressed you most since you arrived here? Prim allowed her imagination to fly through the capital train, and the streets, and then settle in her lovely room on floor 12. The clothes. Her voice was breathy. Excited. Every time Effie came to our district for the reaping, I wished I could wear fancy clothes like her. Despite the fact it was the truth, an abrupt sickness grew in her stomach. She sounded like she'd wanted to be reaped, if only to wear fancy clothes. No, that wasn't how it should have come out. She spotted Effie Trinket in the audience and she gave a proud little wave. Her cheeks were a flustered red and Prim thought she saw a tear in her eye. Tell us about your home, Prim. Tell us about your family. Her heart swelled and broke all at the same time when she thought of Katniss, Mother, Buttercup, and Lady. She didn't want to talk about them, not yet. Maybe not ever. The people in the capital wouldn't understand how wonderful they all were. Caesar must have noticed her hesitance because he jumped into a prompt. When you were reaped, an older girl was shouting your name. Was that your sister? Prim's throat closed and she nodded. She took a shuddering gasp. Katniss is my best friend. And my sister. She's the bravest person I know. She looked directly into the camera, wishing Katniss could see the intentionality. She told me, during our goodbye, that she would have volunteered for me if she was still of reaping age. And how did that make you feel? Caesar's voice was gentle. Glad she was too old. I wanted her to stay home and get married. The audience let out a collective "oh." Prim wasn't trying to gain their sympathy, but it made her feel a little better all the same. So when you had to say goodbye, I'm sure it was with a heavy heart, but I see determination in you, Prim. How do you think you'll do in the games? I'm going to die. She wanted to shriek. Don't you get it? But she held her tongue and instead felt her resolve hardening. She could see her face on the big projector and, for once, she looked like Katniss when Katniss was determined to be strong, fierce, and unbreakable. I'm not going to kill. No matter what, I won't be a monster. 11. No one breathed. Prim wanted to retract her comment. No, she didn't. Yes, no. Every face registered shock, embarrassment, confusion as to how to respond. Should they cheer? Disapprove? Ignore it? Caesar hopped right back in to save the day. Well, no matter what happens, I don't think you, Primrose, could ever become a monster. Best of luck, Primrose Everdeen, tribute from District 12. Prim stood and curtsied like Effie had taught her. Then she returned to her seat. Despite her awkward ending, the applause filled the auditorium like a rising wave. Peter gave her a thumbs up as he passed, taking his turn on stage. He was the last to go, so whatever he said would leave the final taste in the audience's mouth. He'd do great. He was so nice, it would be impossible for people not to like him. Besides, if he earned sponsors, then maybe their money could go toward helping Prim, too. Not that she'd be around long enough to need help. She tuned back into Peter's interview in time to catch him and Caesar joke sniffing each other. She giggled. The audience roared. Then, so, Peter, do you have a girlfriend back home? Peter hesitated and Prim thought he threw a brief glance her way and shook his head. Why did Prim suddenly feel nervous? Handsome lad like you. There must be some special girl. Come on, what's her name, said Caesar. Peter sighed. Well, there's this one girl. I've had a crush on her ever since I can remember. But I'm pretty sure she didn't know I was alive until the reaping. The crowd sighed as one. Some women even lifted handkerchiefs to their eyes. Prim watched Peter closely. Who did he love? Something in her gut told her she should know the answer. She have another fellow? Caesar asked. Yeah. He grimaced. Why did he keep talking about this? Was it a ploy to gain sympathy and attention from sponsors? Prim hoped so, she didn't like thinking of Peter's heart hurting. So, here's what you do. You win, you go home. Fight for her. She can't turn you down then, eh? Caesar gave him an encouraging slap on the knee. I don't think it's going to work out. Winning won't help in my case. Yes it would. Prim balled her hands into fists, even more determined. She'd help Peter get home. He was so nice. So friendly. No girl could turn him down. Why ever not? Asked Caesar, mystified. Peter looked down at his hands. Because, her little sister came here with me. It took a moment for that to sink in. Prim frowned, then gasped just as the camera settled on her face. Katniss. He loved Katniss. Her eyes welled. Poor Peter. Did he know Katniss was going to marry Gale next year? Was Katniss watching this? What was she thinking? Did she know Peter loved her? She told Prim that Peter would watch out for her. She had to have known. But it didn't matter. If he won the games, that meant Prim would be dead and, no matter what Peter did to protect her, it would never be enough for Katniss. But that didn't matter. Katniss and Gale were meant to be together. They were perfect for each other. Poor Peter. So that's why he was so nice, he wanted to protect Prim, as a last heroic act for the girl he loved. Oh, that is a piece of bad luck. Caesar's voice barely rose above the sad murmurs of the crowd. It's not good, agreed Peter. Well, I don't think any of us can blame you. If she looks anything like young Primrose here, it'd be hard not to fall for her. Caesar tossed out a soft grin. She didn't know. Peter shook his head. Neither of them did. Not until now. But if I can't win the games, I'm making sure Prim does, so she can go back to her sister. Prim let out a tiny sob and wanted to kick the camera that projected her wilting face on screen. Well, best of luck to you, Peter Mellock, and I think I speak for all of Panem when I say our hearts go with yours. The roar of the crowd, Peter's soft thank you, the anthem, all faded into the background of Prim's swirling thoughts. No. This wouldn't work. He couldn't try and help her win. She'd put him in danger. Didn't she just tell everyone she wasn't going to kill any tributes? She followed Effie, Haymitch, and Peter into the elevator, keeping her head low. Effie was sniffling and Haymitch nudged Peter. Good job out there. They're eating out of the palm of your hands. A thin strand of hope lifted Prim's head. So it was all pretend. She looked at Peter. He shook his head and gave her a wobbly smile. No, it was real, Prim. Your sisters had me captivated my whole life. I just wasn't quick enough to earn her love. Prim's bottom lip trembled. But aren't there other girls? SHHHH. He gave her a side hug. Don't worry, it's not all as bleak as it came out on stage. I'm over it. I'm happy that Katniss has a man who will take care of her. Hopefully my interview got us some sponsors and will help send you home. The elevator reached their floor and they walked into the smell of dinner. No. Prim shook her head and tried to push him away. Please don't try to protect me. I'm not going to make it. You heard me up there, I'm not going to kill anyone. I won't fight. But would she? Everyone always said the arena transformed a person into a bloodlusting beast. What if she didn't have as much control over herself as she thought? Let's eat. Haymitch plopped at the table. And then you two are going straight to bed. You leave at dawn and we won't be going with you. Prim choked on a sip of water. Peter squeezed her hand. It had been so easy to forget about the games starting tomorrow during the whirlwind of interviews. Any final words of advice? Peter asked. When the gong sounds, get out of there. Neither of you are up to the bloodbath at the cornucopia. Haymitch settled his gaze on Prim. No matter how fast you are. You'll die in seconds. Prim lost her appetite. Die in seconds. She had two options, step off the platform and get blown to smithereens, but then Katniss would be crushed because Prim didn't even put up a fight. Or run to the cornucopia and get slaughtered there. It'd be more painful, but at least Katniss would think that Prim tried. And eat. Haymitch shoved a whole platter of roasted duck toward her. You have no idea if there will be food there. Fill up, sweetheart. This, at least, she would obey, despite the fact every bite tasted like paper. She didn't want to starve. That was too slow. She remembered starving after father died. The worst stomach pains she'd ever remembered until Katniss came home with a burned loaf of bread one night. Prim never asked how she got it. It had to have come from the baker, where Peter lived. Was that how they knew each other? Prim ate so much that she practically crawled back to her room, the place of perfect escape. She changed into soft fluffy pajamas, crawled under the covers, and forced her mind to shut down. It obeyed the best it could, but her stomach kept clenching and squirming like it did the night before the reaping. Only this time, there was no Mom or Katniss to crawl into bed with. The nightmares were coming and this time Prim was alone. Tomorrow, she'd be in the arena. 12. Prim tried not to vomit in the hovercraft. If she did, then stuffing herself during breakfast was a waste. She needed to keep all the food in her that she could. Her arm still stung from where the woman in the white coat inserted her tracker. Cinna rejoined her and she clamped onto his hand. Cinna, will you tell Katniss I love her? Sure, little Primrose. Don't talk like that. The hovercraft lowered. If only the windows weren't blacked out, Prim could figure out where they were. They hadn't flown very long, a half hour or so at most. They exited the hovercraft and followed instructions into the launch room. Prim showered as long as Cinna allowed her to, soaking in the hot water, wishing she could somehow drown in the spray instead of step into the glass tube that would lift her into the arena. Time to get ready, he said through the door. She stepped out and pulled on the undergarments. Cinna then helped her with the light brown pants, green blouse, belt, and long hooded jacket. They fit perfectly. The material in the jacket is designed to reflect body heat. Expect some cool nights. Helpful, if she lived long enough to sleep in it. Maybe she should try to connect with Rue first so that she could give Rue her jacket for extra warmth. Maybe. You're all set, unless you want to eat more. Prim shook her head. I'm already about to throw up. He chuckled, probably to help ease her tension, and they sat together on a bench, waiting. Prim hated it. She wanted it over with. She could barely feel her legs. Was she even breathing? Why all this waiting? Was it just to torment her and the other tributes? Do you want to talk? I'm going to die, she blurted. He took her hand in his. Probably, little Primrose. But you seem ready. His words released her tension like a drain that unclogged. Finally. Someone got it. No one else seems to agree. They keep telling me I can fight, I can survive, I can hide. They just don't get it, Cinna. I understand. She closed her eyes and rested her head on his shoulder, like she used to do with father. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't. When she came up into that arena, she needed to look strong and brave, for Katniss who'd be watching from home. Please prepare for launch, a pleasant female voice announced. Panic slammed Prim against the wall. No. Not yet. No. No. Pressure built inside. She was going to be sick. She was going to faint. She was about to die. Let it out, Cinna urged, leading her to the circular metal plate. She gulped for breath. Just let it out. She did. She screamed, a high-pitched frantic shriek that rang around them like a banshee's echo. Then she breathed out a feathery, embarrassed laugh. There we go. Cinna grinned and double-checked the zipper on her jacket. Prim smiled, a wobbly one, but a smile nonetheless. She'd miss Cinna. Remember to find water. And find Peter, he'll protect you. And find Rue. If Prim planned to survive, that's what she'd do. But she didn't plan to survive. In less than 2 minutes, she'd be dead. A glass cylinder lowered around her, cutting her off from Cinna. He held her gaze, fierce and assuring, until the cylinder began to rise like an elevator. She entered darkness for several long moments and then sunlight blinded her. Wind. The scent of pine. For a brief moment, she felt free. Claudius Templar Smith boomed all around them, ladies and gentlemen, let the 74th Hunger Games begin. The projected 60 started its countdown, with a deep click that reverberated in Prim's chest every time a number changed. She wobbled on her metal circle, but caught herself. She blinked until the scene cleared and she could make out the other tributes on their circles. Forest to the left, lake to the right, green grass ahead. 55. 54. 53. The golden cornucopia sat in the center of a ring of tributes. All eyes were fixed upon it. Prim faced the mouth of it and could see piles of weapons, backpacks, crates, food, etc. For a moment, she imagined the tributes in there, fighting for different weapons, blood flinging left and right. 42. 41. 40. But she was fast. If she was going to die, she at least wanted Peter or Rue to win. Maybe she could get some things from the cornucopia for them. 30. 29. 28. Peter crouched on his circle to her right, angled toward the forest to Prim's left. Prim couldn't see Rue. She must be behind the cornucopia. From that vantage point, Rue wouldn't head for the pile of things inside the cornucopia, it'd be too dangerous for her. It was up to Prim to get them their weapons. And if she died trying, then she died for a good cause. 10. 9. 8. She positioned her feet and focused on her target, just like when she ran races at school. Always look at the finish line, never look at the racers. A knife for Peter, a slingshot for Rue. 3. 2. 1. The gong rang out and she sprinted forward. She could hear Katniss's scream in her mind, urging her on. Run. Run, Prim, You can do it. She ran. But her legs were like jelly from all the nerves. And giant boulders of overeaten food rested in her stomach. She was slow. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted someone else heading for the cornucopia, too. Same speed. It was a boy. And he was huge. But Prim didn't give him a full glance. If she was going to die right now, she wanted it to be from behind. She didn't want to know it was coming. And big boys killed fast. She reached the pile and grabbed the first things her hand came in contact with, a brown backpack filled to the brim with who knew what. Her left hand shot out and snagged a slingshot that lay on a crate. Now, for a knife. There, on the opposite wall in a bracket with other weapons. She rushed over, stuffing the slingshot into her belt. Someone screamed behind her. She spun around and screamed herself. Blood and tributes, some on the ground, some standing over the dead ones with bloody swords. Her hand hovered over the knife on the wall. Cato, the biggest tribute of them all from District 2, stood on the other side of the cornucopia opening. Blood splattered his bright blonde hair. A young boy tribute lay slashed on the ground. Dead. Cato lifted his crazed gaze from the body at his feet, and looked straight at Prim. 13. Prim's mind screamed run. But her feet wouldn't obey. A sadistic smile twisted Cato's lips and he took long purposeful strides toward her, lifting the giant machete over his head. The blood of his last victim dripped on his face, but he didn't slow. This was it. I'm sorry, Katniss. A knife tumbled through the air and the butt of the handle slammed into Cato's temple. Blood exploded from his head. He lurched to the side in reflex, and then someone was grabbing Prim's arm with a tight grip and yanking her away. Oh my gosh, Prim, get out of here. Peter's desperate voice jolted her out of her terror. She closed her fist over the knife and he pulled her toward the forest. Cato let out a giant roar from behind them. Prim twisted her head to look, but Peter pushed her forward even harder. Just keep running. He's not coming after us. They ran, pell-mell, through the screams and dying bodies. Some sort of hatchet flew past Peter's head. He didn't flinch, just scooped it up as they ran. Prim couldn't breathe. She couldn't see through the tears filling her eyes. Peter saved her. Is Cato dead? She sobbed. Why was she crying? No, Peter gasped. I can't throw worth beans, but I think I nicked him. The handle of the knife is what did the most damage. Stunned him, I think. Maybe someone else got him while he was startled. Too bad we lost the knife, but at least we have the hatchet. They entered the forest, leaping over fallen branches and tangled bushes. Leaves slapped her face. Peter didn't let go of her arm, not even when she tumbled to the ground. He yanked her back up and they kept going. The knife in her hand grew slick from her sweat. She needed to put it away. Peter. Keep running. She wiped the tears away with the back of her wrist and looked around at the blurring forest. Where's Rue? We've got to keep running, Prim. She's probably safe somewhere. Will we find her? He slowed a fraction. Maybe. He slapped aside a low-hanging branch. And maybe it's best if we don't. Prim gasped. You wouldn't kill her, would you? If she was trying to kill you then yes, I would. Oh, well she won't try to kill me. He said nothing to that. Didn't he believe her? They alternated running and jogging for a long time and Prim couldn't get her thoughts straight. She was alive now. Alive with no plan at all. Things just became a whole lot more difficult but, she didn't mind so much. It was nice to still be breathing. Hours passed. Prim didn't think she could go another step. Her hand cramped around the knife she'd gotten for Peter. The slingshot she tucked into her belt created a dark bruise against her hip bone from the running. Let's rest. Peter glanced around the forest. Prim hung tight by his side. They'd been running so long, surely no one chased them. The knife slid from her fingers and plopped onto the ground, crunching some dead leaves. She teetered to a fallen log and sat on it. Where'd you get this? Peter picked up the knife. The cornucopia. I got it for you. She pulled the slingshot from her belt and rubbed her hip bone. And this is for Rue. Well, you can use it until we find her. A cannon startled them both and Peter looked at the sky. The fighting at the cornucopia must have stopped. We'll know who died when the sun sets, that should be pretty soon. 1, 2, 3, on and on the cannon shots went until it reached 11. She let the backpack slide from her shoulders, not wanting to think about who died, though she kind of hoped Cato had. She kept imagining his sick grin as he advanced to kill her. She plopped the backpack on her lap. Let's look in here. I'm so thirsty. Wow, you grabbed a lot from the cornucopia, Prim. That's because I was getting it for you and Rue. It was easier being brave for others. She opened the brown backpack. Inside were 2 sets of sunglasses, an empty leather pouch with a drawstring, 2 rolls of white bandages, a lighter, and a loaf of bread. Down at the very bottom of the pack was a tiny 8-ounce bottle filled with water. Wow, a whole loaf. Peter took it from her and turned it over. It'll make us thirsty if we eat it right now. Prim eyed the water. That sure wasn't much. She could drink the whole bottle right now. She almost didn't want to show it to Peter, but that would be greedy. Look, we have water. He glanced at the bottle. There's not much. Let's each take a sip of water. We'll save the bread for later. She nodded. Of course they had to share. He let her take the first sip. The lukewarm liquid soothed her sticky throat for one glorious moment. Then she wanted more, but she handed the bottle to Peter. He took a tiny sip. 5 more minutes, then we'll keep walking to find a river or something. She nodded with a heavy head, already wishing for sleep and safety. But those things were no longer a part of her life. Now, she was prey. She tied the drawstring pouch to her belt and then put on the sunglasses. Everything looked darker and muddled with them on. I wonder what these do. She handed a pair to Peter. He looked through them, then tucked one set into his pocket. They must do something. We'll fiddle with them later. Time to get moving again. They continued walking, only this time Prim wasn't blinded by terror. She took in the terrain and plants around her. Elderberry, dandelion, feverfew, hawthorn, henna, the list went on. She knew these plants. She could use these. She was walking through a wild apothecary. Peter let her gather a few handfuls of this, a few handfuls of that. She stored them in her pack. She also picked up small rocks as they went and put them in the pouch she'd tied to her belt. For some reason, the idea of using the slingshot with some rocks didn't bother her. It'd be good for self-defense. How much harm could she really do to someone? Besides, when they found Rue, it'd be nice to have a pouch of rocks to give her with the slingshot. Night finally came and Peter cleared a space beneath a fallen log. Prim's entire body ached and even the lumpy ground looked appealing. She squirmed under the log, cringing against the chill seeping into the dirt. Peter came in after her. He took his jacket off and laid it over both of them. Body heat can keep us a little warmer. Prim tensed. This was weird. Even though Peter saved her, he was still a boy and it felt weird to be scrunched under a log next to him. But then again, he was trying to protect her. He was like a big brother. How different was this from Prim falling asleep with Katniss or Mom? The anthem started up and, through a side view out from under the log, Prim glimpsed the faces of the fallen tributes. While Peter counted on his fingers and kept track of their district numbers, Prim just held her breath, waiting for District 11. It never came. That meant Rue was alive. So was Thresh, but that didn't matter much to her. He was scary. And huge. Bigger than Cato. Had he killed people today? Good night, Prim. Peter clutched the knife in one fist and lay facing outward, keeping watch. Good night, Peter. And, thank you for protecting me. She closed her eyes, certain she'd never fall asleep under here. Creepy crawlies moved everywhere on her skin, both imagined and real. She tried not to think of spiders or fire ants or centipedes. But her body wouldn't let her stay awake too long. Despite the growing cold, Prim slipped into a restless, terrified sleep. Only a few hours passed before she woke to a strangled scream, echoing from the darkened forest to her left. She bolted upright, smacking her head on the log. Peter's hand clamped down on her mouth and he shoved her back to the ground. For a wild moment, she was afraid he'd kill her, but then his hiss hit her ears. "They're here. They just killed another tribute nearby." He breathed heavily, trying to both catch his breath and stifle it. "I think they tracked us." 14. I sit on my knees on the floor, inches from the TV screen, watching Prim, my Prim, sprint toward the cornucopia. "No!" I shriek. My mother, who retreated to her bedroom at the start of the games, dashes back into the room, not strong enough to keep herself from watching. "Has she?" She doesn't finish her question. Instead, she collapses into the rocker and stares at the screen, just like when she stared at the wall after Father's death. "No. Not this again. Please, not this again." I don't say a word. I don't want to talk to her. It's not her fault that Prim's in the games, but I can't bear to let the guilt and anger and hopelessness just sit. I have to blame it on something, on someone. Mother's the nearest option. Prim's blonde braid bounces back and forth as she streaks across the grass. She's not as fast as normal. Something's slowing her legs, her nerves, maybe. The tall beefy blonde boy from District 2, Cato, runs on her right, gaining. They'll reach the cornucopia at the same time. What is she doing? She and I are both fast, but did that drunk, hey Mitch, tell her to go for it? I clench my fists, forcing myself to watch. The least I can do for Prim is watch her until the end, support her with my heart. She enters the cornucopia and grabs things left and right with wild desperation. "Get out of there! Get out of there!" I want to shake the stupid console until it jars her head and knocks her into the forest. She's being so brave. I hate it. I hate being here, stuck watching. Cato grabs a sword from one of the cornucopia walls. "I'm going to be sick." He stabs a girl running in behind him in the chest, and then slices through a small boy who just entered the cornucopia. The boy looked like he was trying to negotiate being on a team, but Cato didn't even grant him a breath. Prim hovers over the knives, not noticing Cato. Then some dying tribute screams and she whips around. The camera zooms in on her fear, her wide eyes and innocent face, eating up the drama of the traditional bloodbath. My sister has everyone's attention. Cato advances and I scream at the screen. "Run! Prim, run!" He lifts his sword and I know it's going to be over. That metal will slice through my little duck like a knife through goat cheese. Mother whimpers from her chair. Then comes Peter, the boy with the bread. The boy who professed his love for me on TV last night. He'd been heading toward the forest when he saw Prim and then he veered toward the cornucopia, yanking a knife from the spine of a dead boy who lay over an orange backpack. He dashes toward Cato. He wants to save her. He's going to be too late. "Throw it, you idiot." But if his aim isn't true, he'll hit Prim. 3 steps closer and he throws. It hits Cato in the head and then tumbles off into the piles of goods. It didn't stick. Cato's alive, the handle probably hit him. But now he's distracted. Peter grabs Prim's arm, she's paler than a bleached sheet, and yanks her toward the forest. They run, Cato turns to kill another tribute, and suddenly my sister's out of view, off screen, no longer the focus of the Capitol viewers. She's with Peter. And I owe him again. I owed him so much when he threw me that burned loaf of bread that saved our lives. Now he's saved Prim's life, at the risk of his own, supposedly because he cares for me. I owe him again and I don't mind one bit. If that boy gets my sister back home to me, I'll spend the rest of my life giving free meat to his father and his mother, even if she is a witch. Mother's hands pinch my shoulder and I'm torn between shoving her away and clutching her icy fingers for strength. "She's alive," I croak. "Mum." She's trembling and I'm surprised she can even stand. As if reading my thoughts, she stumbles back to the rocker and lowers herself down, her face bloodless. The front door of our house flies open. I spin around, half expecting to see Peter and Prim dashing inside for safety. It's Gail, my fiancé. My handsome, dark-haired, hunter fiancé who's never seen me cry. I touch my cheeks, just to make sure I'm not crying without knowing it. They're dry. "I heard screaming," he says, panting. I'm sorry I'm late. I couldn't get away from the hub in time for the start of the games. His eyes dart from me to mother and then to me again. Is Prim? She's alive. I push myself to my feet and step into his arms with more force than is necessary for a hug. I need a fierce hug today. He gives it. He always seems to know when I need to pretend to be strong. Peter saved her. Gale says nothing. He's been weird ever since the interviews played last night. I don't know why. It's not like I'm suddenly going to fall in love with a stranger who's been sentenced to a death competition. But, for some reason, he's jealous. It's because I mentioned Peter before last night. I mentioned him on the day of the reaping. After Prim was taken away, Gale came to see how I was doing and I babbled like an idiot, still recovering from the fact my sister was wrenched from my arms. He'll protect her, Gale, Peter Mellock will. He saved our lives once. We were in the same school and he always watched me. He'll protect her. He saved me, I know he'll save her. I know it. I can't say what made me so certain. But there was something about Peter's look when he was reaped. He didn't stare at his parents or look at Effie or glance at the cameras. No. He looked at me. Despite the sad droop to his eyes and the quaking of his hands, his gaze held a determined ferocity. And I knew in that moment that he'd do everything he could for Prim. I knew he wouldn't kill her. And then he had to go and profess his love for me and ruin everything. Sure, it could have been a ploy to protect Prim, to gain the capital's sympathy and to help Prim trust him, which was completely unnecessary because Prim trusts everyone way too easily, but I know it's true. I'd noticed him watching me as we grew up. I thought it was because he was waiting for me to say thank you for the bread. My pride wouldn't allow it. But now, on this side of our youth and our tragedy, I see his looks and his attention differently. I think he really does, like me. And, in a way, I'm happy for him because it'll give him meaning in the games. It will give him hope and, if he has hope, then he'll protect Prim. But it could never change how I feel for Gale. Never. Yet, as I watch him rescue Prim and risk his own life, as I hear him shout, "Oh my gosh, Prim, get out of here," with the same type of desperation that I had in my voice, I half wish he could come home safely so I can thank him. Still, to get him and Prim home, that's impossible. 15. What do we do? Prim clung to Peter as the girl's strangled scream died away. Was it Rue? What if they just killed Rue? The cannon boomed. Be quiet and don't move. Peter rummaged in their bag and pulled out the sunglasses, jamming them onto his face. Prim caught a glimpse through one lens and barely held back a gasp. They gave him night vision. The trees were clear as day and the lenses illuminated human movement. Voices startled her. "Let's get going," a young boy said. "If someone heard that scream, they'll be coming. Or they'll be running." Kato's voice. "Either way, it's more prey for us. Just sit quiet and listen for a few minutes." The blanket of night muted their voices. Prim held her breath, but it only made her want to breathe more, so she buried her face in her sleeve. Hopefully the fabric would hide any noise. 5 minutes passed. 10. 20. Could Kato and the other boy still be there? "I'm bored," a girl whined. "Shut up, Clove." Leaves rustled as the careers started moving again. Peter reached back, pressing down on Prim with his arm. Footsteps scuffed past their log. "Let's go find someone else." A few grunts conveyed there were more than just 3 of them. Kato, Clove, a boy, and someone else. Did any of them have the night glasses? Their sounds moved on and shortly after, a hovercraft showed up, lowered a claw into the forest where the girl screamed, and then sped away. Prim tried to glimpse the body it picked up, but it was too dark. "Please don't let it be Rue." "We should get out of here," Peter muttered. No. Prim couldn't leave, not yet. They'd be caught for sure. They won't check here again for a long while. Let's just keep sleeping. As if she could fall back asleep after that. Someone just died. Too many people died today and she witnessed it. She couldn't help anyone, not even herself. She couldn't bear this. Just try to go back to sleep, Prim. Peter's voice sounded pained. He left the night glasses on and clutched the hatchet and knife close to his chest. Prim tried to sleep. She really tried, but the drifting in and out only left her exhausted and on the brink of nightmares. She ached for the sunrise, if only to move from this place. But Peter needed the sleep. Somehow, he managed to fall asleep despite the chill, despite the death, despite the fear. But when light came, Prim shook him awake. Her tongue felt rough against the roof of her mouth. "Can we drink some of the water? And maybe eat something?" Sure, Peter grunted, yanking open the pack. They each took one more sip of water from the tiny water bottle. It was half empty now. Peter sliced a thick piece of bread for each of them. He cut it from the middle, and then pushed the two bread halves back together. By leaving the ends on, the inside of the loaf will stay fresh longer. Signs of a baker's son. They crawled out from under the log, Prim's instincts on alert. This arena was huge, but she was certain someone, Cato, would be hiding nearby, ready to cut her with his machete. Good thing they didn't have night glasses. Peter brushed dirt from his clothes. Good thing you grabbed the backpack that did have night glasses. He handed her the other pair. Keep these in your jacket pocket. He left the rest of the sentence unspoken, in case we get separated or in case I die. What now? He looked around at the forest. We need to find water. With that, he took the lead into the forest. Prim followed and cringed every time he snapped a branch or crunched leaves, which was, with every footstep. She was much quieter. Was it because she was small? Was it because she'd been around Katniss so much? I think maybe we should head back to the lake. Her head snapped up. No. That's where Cato and everyone will be. She'd seen past games. If the career tributes survived the bloodbath, which they usually did, then they owned the cornucopia. Prim, what if that's the only source of water? Her stomach turned cold. It can't be. This is a forest, there's got to be a river somewhere. This is the Hunger Games. They made this arena. It doesn't work like real forests. Can we just look? For one more day. If we don't find water by tonight, we can go to the lake tomorrow, okay? Today was different than yesterday. Yesterday, she was ready to die at the cornucopia, but she'd survived. And she didn't feel so brave today. She wished, by some miracle, she could go back home. But that was selfish because, in order to survive, that meant Peter and Rue would both have to die. They walked for hours and her thighs ached. What was the purpose? Once they found water, then what? Prim wanted, more than anything, to find Rue and make sure she was safe. Tonight, when the dead tributes were projected into the sky, she'd know which girl died last night. Please, don't let it be Rue. She and Peter had long since stopped any talking. She couldn't tell if his footsteps were getting quieter or if the forest noises, birds, bugs, wind, were just getting louder. Something was getting louder, like television static. Peter threw his arm out to stop her. Do you hear that? His voice, barely a whisper, sent her nerves into spiraled terror. No. She heard nothing. Had he seen someone? That static sound, I think it's a river. Her terror fled. Where? He held a finger to his lips and they continued forward. As the rushing sound grew louder, Prim's excitement danced inside her. Water. They found it. They wouldn't have to go to the lake. It had to be a river. Nothing else could make that sound. They passed a clump of trees and, in the distance, the ground sloped downward just a bit. A river. There it was. She wanted to run to it, but didn't dare make so much noise. Patience. She would follow. Peter remained on the alert, his hatchet held a little higher than normal. Large rocks and boulders lined the bank of the river as they got closer. Prim and Peter rounded one and, on the other side, was a career tribute. Marvel, from District 1. He was bending over some sort of netted trap on the ground, weaving knots and tying off ends. Setting up a trap for some future tribute. But his head snapped up at their approach. His eyes widened and he leapt to his feet, yanking a dagger from the dirt. Peter was faster. He hurled his hatchet just as Prim knocked his arm, screaming, "No! 16. Peter's hatchet thunked into Marvel's shoulder. Marvel, startled with wide eyes, dropped his dagger, and fell to the ground. Prim's scream died on her lips. "You made me miss!" Peter shouted at her, but from the sweat on his brow and the tears in his eyes, Prim could tell his shout came from fear, not anger. "Now, I have to," he groaned. Now he had to finish the job. Marvel whimpered on the ground, his free hand reaching for the hatchet, but not strong enough to pull it out. Blood covered the left side of his body. Prim stared with her mouth opened. A spear lay on the ground, but not near enough for Marvel to grasp it. "We have to hurry." Peter strode toward Marvel. "Someone will have heard your scream, Prim." What was he going to do? She stumbled after him. Wait. She'd screamed no. Because she didn't want Peter to kill Marvel. She didn't want anyone to die, and that was completely unfair of her. She couldn't ask Peter to hold to the same decisions she made, not to kill anyone. He said he'd even kill Rue if he had to keep Prim safe. Now she just made this kill harder for him. But as he reached Marvel, she knew she couldn't let him finish the job. She couldn't let Peter turn into a monster. Peter hovered a good 3 feet away from Marvel. He kicked aside the dropped dagger and the spear, then scanned the rest of Marvel's outfit. "I think he's unarmed." Marvel was in his own world of pain. His wild eyes darted between the two of them. "Please." "Please what?" "Leave. Save him. Kill him quickly." Prim couldn't handle it. She ran toward him and fell to her knees. A sob burst from her throat. The boy was hurting. Hurting bad. "Peter, help me. Get the bandages from the backpack." "What?" "No. Prim, we can't." She didn't argue. If Peter wanted to kill Marvel, he'd have to wrestle Prim away from his wounded body to do it. Mom trained Prim to be a healer, and, if she wouldn't kill in the games, then she'd do the opposite. She'd heal. The hatchet wasn't too deep. His collarbone stopped it from doing any real damage. "Peter, give me your knife and get me 1 roll of the bandages." He did as she asked, but said under his breath, "I don't think this is wise, Prim. We should get out of here, let him take care of himself." Why didn't Peter get it? Marvel was wounded and needed help. That's what people did, they helped each other, Hunger Games or not. "You can go if you want to. But leave me the bandages." She cut Marvel's jacket from the collar to the hatchet blade and peeled it back to reveal the full wound. Already, the skin swelled. Peter rubbed a hand down his face, huffed out a sigh, and then patted down Marvel's body. "I don't think he has any more weapons. Be on alert, though, Prim. He's still got a good arm." He set the roll of bandages on a rock next to her. "I'll fill our water bottle." He was staying. He wasn't going to desert her, even though she was currently putting them in danger. He really did love Katniss if he was willing to let Prim save an enemy. Marvel's eyes were squeezed tight shut and he trembled. "Get it out. Get it out." His free hand clenched and unclenched, then pounded the dirt. "Get it out." Prim laid a hand on his forehead. "Shush, I will. Just try to be calm." If only she had some valerian flowers to help him with the pain and to put him to sleep, or catnip leaves to slow the bleeding. "Peter, can you find me some moss?" It took her an hour. Peter stood watch while Prim pressured the wound around the hatchet with moss and with some of Marvel's shirt. It stanched the flow rather well. When she finally pulled the hatchet blade from his shoulder muscle, Marvel arched his back and groaned from deep in his throat. Then she bandaged it as best she could with one of the bandages from the backpack. Now, though, he lay staring off toward the river with glassy eyes. Prim had seen this look before. Pain shock. But she'd treated him before he lost too much blood. He should be okay. She covered him in his own coat. "If you can, try to let yourself sleep." Peter crouched over the river, the water bottle in both hands. She approached him, but he didn't look up. "So now what?" "What do you mean?" He looked at her with hollow eyes. "Can we leave him now? Can we move on?" Prim's throat closed. Why can't he join us?" It was a stupid question. She'd seen Marvel during training, throwing spears into the heart of every dummy. She could almost hear the Capitol viewers whispering from their sides of the TV screens, "She's going to die soon. Marvel will stab her in the back, the little fool. He's a ruthless courier who just tried to kill us. Why don't you leave, Peter?" She didn't want him to go away, not at all. She liked his comforting presence and his protection. But she couldn't ask him to make the same choices as she was. She couldn't ask him to let everyone live. This was his open door, he didn't need to feel bad for leaving her, she was putting him in danger. "I don't mind. I want you to win, Peter. If you stay with me, I'll only make it harder for you. You can head toward the lake if you want. Take the bread, too." He turned toward her and looked into her face for a long moment. Then he pulled her into a hug. "I'm not going to leave you, Prim. Don't think about Katniss," she mumbled into his coat. "She won't blame you for leaving me." "Yes she will, but don't admit it. Don't stay here just because of her." He chuckled and leaned back, taking a sip of water. "It's not just because of Katniss, Prim. I want to protect you and help you, for your sake, too. I'm not so one-track minded. So you're really going to stay with me? Even if I keep taking care of Marvel? All the way to the end, Prim." 17. "Why'd you do this?" Marvel's voice startled Prim. He'd been sleeping for a few hours and she didn't expect him to wake so soon. It was almost dark and she watched the sky, anticipating the anthem to see whether or not it was Rue who Cato killed earlier this morning. Peter jumped to his feet at Marvel's question. "No talking." Marvel glared at him. "I'll do what I want. Your little friend won't let you kill me, so your threats mean nothing." He turned his gaze back to Prim. "So, why'd you do this?" "Why did he ask? Wasn't it obvious? You were injured. Because of him." Marvel jerks his head toward Peter. "Why'd you try to stop him? What am I to you?" She straightened her spine. "A person." He growled and then sucked in a breath, clutching his wrapped shoulder. When he caught his breath, he lay flat on his back, but his words were clear. "You're going to die then." Did he mean she'd die in general? Or did he mean, gulp, that he'd kill her? "I know." A humorous laugh bubbles from his pain-tensed lips. "Freak. Get some rest," Peter snapped, stepping between Prim and Marvel. "We're moving on in the morning, whether you're feeling up to it or not." "What makes you think I'll go with you?" Peter shrugged. "Fine. Don't." Prim grabbed his sleeve. "He has to. That is a big wound and infection might set. I need to keep it clean." "We can't stay here just for him," Peter said under his breath. "Otherwise he'll start thinking he can control us. I'm going to kill both of you." Marvel's shout echoed through the forest, startling some mockingjays. "Shut up." Peter kicked dirt his way, then rounded on Prim. "Can I gag him?" She stared at Marvel. Would he really kill them the moment he could move? Maybe gagging him would be best. Maybe they should leave him behind. "Don't you get it?" Marvel said. "If I'm loud enough, my team will come for me. And then they'll kill you." When Peter spoke next, it was with eerie calm. "Oh, really?" He took a step closer to Marvel. "It's hard for me to believe Cato would want to save a wounded tribute who's not even from his own district, who's weaponless. Cato has control of the cornucopia. He'll give me whatever weapons I want." Despite the bravado, Marvel's voice wavered. "Or," Peter's speech was deadly soft and he stepped even closer, "Cato will just slit your helpless throat and get one tribute closer to the win." Prim had never heard Peter talk like this. Threatening. Creepy. Angry. Did she know him at all? Abruptly, Peter straightened and his voice returned to a normal, nonchalant, afternoon tea tone. "But, whatever. If you have that much faith in the bloodthirsty career tribute you met only a week ago, then by all means, call him. Then you'll be off our hands." Peter looked around the forest as if curious. "Actually, I'll call him for you so you don't have to risk tearing open your wound." "Cato. Cato. Oh, Cato." Stop! Prim shrieked, clamping palms over her ears, but not before she heard Marvel yell the same thing. Hands gently pulled hers away and Peter whispered so only she could hear. I'm sorry. Trust me. Then he turned to Marvel. You want me to stop? Did you change your mind? Just shut up, pretty boy. Okay, so I'm at your mercy, but don't think I won't kill you the first chance I get. I'd never think that. Peter walked to the river, filled the tiny 8-ounce water bottle, and held it up toward Marvel. Thirsty. Just then, the anthem began. Prim pressed her hands together and held them up against her lips, watching the sky. A face showed up in the sky. Not Rue. It was some girl of whom Prim hardly took notice, whose district number she couldn't even remember. It's not Rue. I'm glad, for your sake. Peter tossed the water bottle to Marvel, then started scooping dirt out from under an overhanging boulder. The gap beneath it was wide enough for 2 people. We'll stay here one night and then find better shelter. For now, I'll take first watch. Make sure this idiot doesn't try something stupid. Peter didn't need to call Marvel names. It'd only make Marvel hate him more. But maybe it was an act. Prim knew Peter, he wasn't a mean person. Maybe, because he knew Marvel was drawn to the leading type like Kato, maybe Peter was trying to act tough. So Marvel would respect him. The more Prim thought about it, the more it made sense to her. Prim scooted into the space under the boulder. Keep an eye out for Rue, too, while you're awake. I will. Prim let out a sigh. I wonder where she is. Here I am. Up popped Rue from behind a boulder at the river's edge, sporting a half-shy half-mischievous grin. 18. Rue's chipper tweet of a voice startled Prim so much she smashed her forehead against the rock's underside. Rue. Rue. Peter sounded relieved. Marvel rolled his eyes. Great, another tender-hearted idiot. Rue yanked a handmade wooden sling out of her pocket and shot a rock right into Marvel's thigh. It hit him with a bruising thwack. He grunted, but didn't say anything. A sling and a rock weren't much threat, but Prim was glad to see Rue defending herself against jibes. For some reason, she knew Rue wouldn't kill Marvel either. Are you going to join us? Rue glanced at Peter. He smiled. Of course you're joining us. We were going to start searching for you tomorrow, anyway. I know. She bounced over to where Prim lay and crawled in as if it were her own bed. I'll take second watch. And that was that. Rue was with them. All of Prim's worries dissipated as she and her friend burrowed like little gophers getting comfortable. She could tell, just by Rue's actions and sleeping position, that she had a sister, too. My sister is Katniss. She's older than me. Is she the girl Peter likes? Prim nodded, a twist in her gut reminding her of Peter's promise and his non-existent happy ending. She's wonderful. I bet every boy likes her. But Peter's really nice. Do you think she'd like him? Peter plopped down by the opening, leaning his back up against the boulder. I can hear you too. They giggled into their hands. Go to sleep. The smile in his voice made Prim grin. Good night, Peter. Good night, girls. It was good of him to take first watch, and especially kind of Rue. Prim hadn't thought to offer to take a watch. She'd relieve Rue in the morning. She was good at waking up early, that was always when she milked Lady. Rue closed her dark eyes and practically blended into the dirt. The fact she revealed herself to them told Prim a lot about how trustworthy Peter was. Rue wouldn't trust just as how Prim and she were different. Rue was so cautious, hiding and observing. How long had she been following them before she decided to pop up? Prim, well, Prim trusted so many people. Katniss used to tell her to be careful, especially when she'd give goat cheese to peacekeepers. But everyone had good inside of them, and that seemed to be all Prim could see when she looked at a person. Even Marvel had good. She saw the terror in his eyes when they caught him making the net trap. At home he had a family, maybe even a little sister, maybe even a girlfriend who missed him. Prim teared at the very thought. She didn't want to be tough. She didn't want to stop caring about people. Helping Marvel and finding Rue reminded her how much she loved life. And if she could give life to others during the games, then the reaping was worth it. Underscore 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 underscore. I'm pretty good at finding edible food, Prim told Rue the next morning. Peter let them go foraging together as long as they didn't under any circumstances wander too far away or get separated. She'd spent part of the morning tending to Marvel's wound. He didn't speak to or look at her the whole time. I'm really good at climbing. Rue knelt and picked up another rock to add to her slingshot stash. Oh, and whistling. Prim stopped at a berry patch, examined the light purple fruit, and started picking. I wish I could whistle. It took me a long time to learn. Rue sent up a soft three-note whistle. The mockingjays repeated it, harmonizing with each added bird voice. Prim made a little bowl out of her jacket and filled it with berries. They both ate some here and there. Peter wouldn't mind. So what are we going to do? Prim wiped berry juice off her fingers onto her pants. What do you mean? I mean, how are we going to win? The Couriers have been spending all their time at the cornucopia. They're always protecting it and one boy keeps digging holes everywhere. I think they have a plan. Maybe they are burying the food. But why would they bury it? To keep Prim and the others from getting it. That didn't make sense. Let's just get a lot of our own food right now. Then we'll talk to Peter. Once they had enough berries, they found some nuts, herbs, and honeysuckle. Prim's fingers were stained purple from the berries. She made sure not to spill a single one as they made their way back to the river. Peter would be so proud. They were halfway there when Rue pulled up short. Prim stopped too, accidentally spilling a handful of berries from her coat, but Rue's tense face and darting eyes alerted her. They stood stock still for a full minute before Prim whispered, "What is it?" Rue took a tentative step forward. I think, someone's following us." 19. Rue whipped out her sling and had it loaded with a sharp stone before Prim could even register fear. Prim pulled hers out of her belt and followed suit, of only to do something with her hands. Rue turned and they stood back to back for a moment. Prim scanned the forestry but couldn't even spot a place where anyone could hide. Was Rue certain she heard something? "Maybe we should get back to Peter," Prim whispered. At the mention of Peter's name her imagination took off like a startled bird. What if Marvel had attacked Peter somehow? What if Marvel was following them, preparing to stab them with his spear? "Let's go." Rue's voice was fierce and determined. She and Prim sprinted at the same time side by side, neither one gaining ahead. They were a team. Bushes crashed apart, twigs snapped, and Prim threw a glance over her shoulder. No one. But she felt it now, she felt followed. They burst into the section by the river and there lay Marvel, still sleeping with an angry frown on his face. Peter sat on a stone by the river with Marvel's spear hovering over the flowing water. A stack of dead fish, all with a white hole in their bodies, lay on the ground beside him. He jumped to his feet at their approach, the spear now poised in a throwing position. Instinctively, Prim squealed, "It's us." "I won't kill you on accident," he said, sounding a little insulted. "Someone was following us." Rue kept her slingshot tight in her hand. Prim looked back into the forest and still saw no one. "She thinks someone was following us." If only Rue was wrong. "It's probably Kato." Marvel gave a nasty grin, pushing himself to a sitting position. "Then we better get moving." Peter acted as though Marvel's words didn't scare him, but his eyes darted back and forth, scanning the forest. Prim didn't like thinking of Peter being afraid. He was their protector. "We brought some food." She showed him her cupped jacket. Maybe that would calm him. "Good job, girls. Stow it in the pack and let's get going." He jerked his head at Marvel. "Get up." "What if I can't?" Marvel sneered. "Well, seeing as how you're wounded, weaponless, and without any food, I don't think it'd be in your best interest to be defiant and stay here." Marvel growled, he actually growled, like a caged cat, then pushed himself to his feet. "We'll give you some of our food." Prim gestured to their supplies. "Just shut up." Marvel focused on not jostling his bandaged arm. Peter slung the pack over his shoulder, slid the hatchet into his belt, and used the spear as a walking stick. Wheel, He glanced around, head back into the forest, retracing where you felt followed, and then curve back to the river. Marvel snorted. Do you have a better idea? Peter's knuckles whitened on the spear staff. Peter's doing the best he can. Prim exclaimed, planting her hands on her hips. He's going to keep all of us safe. Don't you want to be safe? Marvel sighed and stared up at the sky as though imagining Prim's face up there, proclaiming her death. She had an urge to stomp her foot on the ground, but that would just make her appear more immature. She didn't want to give Marvel more reason to be cruel. But didn't he want to be safe? Who wouldn't want safety? Life. Friends. It made no sense. Marvel teetered on his feet. Despite his bravado, his pale skin revealed the effort standing took. He shouldn't be walking yet, not after such a wound. But the games didn't follow the normal rules of healing. She stepped close to Peter. Maybe we should give Marvel some bread. Without a word, Peter ripped off a small chunk and tossed it to Marvel. Marvel caught it in his good hand before he even looked at it, signs of someone who was used to catching and throwing weapons. Marvel glared at Peter. The more food you give me, the more strength I get with which to kill you. If you're that much against us feeding and helping you, then just give the bread back. Poor Peter. More and more, Prim wished she had the power to force him to leave, to be free of these burdens she brought to their small group, such as wounded enemies. Marvel stuffed the bread in his mouth. Better get moving before Kato shows up. Was that a warning? Or was Marvel just afraid of being killed by his fellow career tribute? You're right. Was Peter really agreeing with him? Or playing an angle? Prim rubbed her eyes. Too much overthinking. They set out for the forest, Rue in the lead, Marvel next with Peter directly behind him, and Prim bringing up the rear. She didn't like being in the back, it made her feel as though Kato could come up behind her and snatch her away before anyone noticed, but she understood why Peter put her there. Rue somehow knew how to navigate through the forest, Peter could monitor Marvel, and Prim was safe to run if she needed to. The forest seemed more ominous, even though it was broad daylight. Prim scanned the ground. There. Imprints in the dirt. Peter, she hissed. There are footprints. They seemed small. It must be a girl following them. Who else had small feet? I think those are yours and Rue's, from when you came this way the first time. Prim's cheeks flared with heat. Of course they were. How stupid of her. Marvel guffawed, loud and echoing. Peter knocked him in the temple with the butt of the spear. Shut it. Marvel obeyed, but the look he gave Peter from Prim's point of view, was more murderous than anyone she'd seen before this. He was dangerous. Too dangerous. But she still didn't regret saving him. It went against everything Mom trained her to be. This is the spot, Rue whispered, and stopped. All except Marvel scanned the area. Peter ventured a few feet into the forest. He didn't seem to know what to look for, and why should he? He was a baker's son. But Prim noticed something, or, rather, the absence of something. When they all congregated again, she spoke in a low voice. The berries that I spilled aren't here anymore. Someone picked them up. 20. I sit with Gale, clutching his hand tighter than I would the wrung neck of a turkey. This is the last straw. Prim saved Marvel's life. She's been the same Prim I've always known, and I love it yet hate it with every fiber of my being. No one's going to sponsor her if she doesn't kill anyone. But maybe they will. She's gaining some sympathy since the capital is giving her so much screen time. Gale stays calm and cool beside me, like a glass of winter-chilled water. I hate that he's seeing me panic, but he's the only one I can panic with. If I panic in front of Mother, she comes dangerously close to returning to her half-coma state. The moment Prim and Rue, who reminds me incredibly of Prim, only with darker skin and an extra swallow of bravery, walk into the forest to collect berries, I know something's wrong. The capital commentators start speaking up. Take a look here. A small screen pops in the corner of the game's feed, showing Claudius Templar Smithers' face with his nasty blonde half-afro. The female tribute from District 5 is closing in on Prim and Rue. We haven't seen much violence from her, but maybe this will be when she makes her move. That stupid redhead girl, Foxface, is what I call her, has been following tributes here and there, snatching up food or belongings, not enough to be noticed, but enough to help her survive. It's sneaky and smart, and I wish I could scream loud enough to send information through the screen to my little duck. Get out of there. But Foxface hovers, using stealth that makes me jealous and elicits a "she's good" from Gale. I almost snap at him, but even I have to admit her stealth could surprise a cougar. But as Rue and Prim are heading back to the river, Foxface makes a mistake. Her knee buckles and she falls hard enough to snap a small branch. I don't know why her knee buckled. She must be famished. Starving. Weak. Good. That means maybe she won't be able to kill my sister. They need to get back to Peter. It slips out before I can catch myself. Gale stiffens beside me. He can't do anything. He saved her life once. And mine, once, too. I need to defend him. Gale doesn't understand. Right now, with the way Prim is handling things, Peter's her only hope. Can't Gale see that? Rue holds Prim and they stand stock still. The camera flashes between them and Foxface, who freezes as though dead. They stand there for a long time. They should be running. Even if they do figure out who's behind them, what good will their slingshots do? But Foxface doesn't make a move. Finally, Rue and Prim run back to their little camp. Back to Peter, who's up with a spear in his hand the moment they come into view. Everything in me relaxes and I think Gale notices. Don't place too much hope in him, Katniss. Don't strip me of my hope, Gale. I shove off the musty old couch and stand behind it. Why is he so insistent on stealing away my comfort? What's wrong with you? Are you jealous of Peter? Of course not. Jealousy is beneath Gale. Or maybe he just won't admit it. I don't like thinking of him being jealous. It makes him seem weak. Unstable. Once Peter, the girls, and Marvel start moving, the view switches to Cato and his gang, piling all the items from the cornucopia. I'm going to the hob. Gale turns to look at me. What for? We've no game to trade. I'm gonna get Prim some sponsor money. Even if it means hunting all day and night, risking my life against the peacekeepers, breaking curfew. But the sponsor money's not really for Prim. It's for Peter, though I can't tell Gale that. Prim wouldn't know what to do with parachutes from Haymitch. If I want her coming back alive, then I need to make sure that Peter has everything he needs. I need to make sure he survives. At least until he and Prim are the last ones standing. Then he'll need to die. 21. They curved back to the river after an hour and then waded upstream, in the stream, to keep their tracks from being noticed. Prim sludged at the back of the pack, her legs aching with every step. Marvel was pale and Peter breathed hard. Can we stop to eat? Rue asked. Yes please. Prim looked to Peter, who finally nodded, and they settled on a narrow strip of bank. It was less than ideal, with no real shelter and a lot of mud in which to leave tracks. Prim went around, handing out a small serving of berries. Think it's safe to start a fire? Peter toyed with his fish. They weren't so fresh anymore and smelled almost rancid. Prim's mouth watered at the very thought of eating a fire-roasted fish. But, was it safe to have a fire? I think it'd be fine. Marvel didn't look up from his bread. Prim stilled and Peter looked at Marvel with narrowed eyes. You do you? That's it then, no fire. Prim's heart flopped down into her boots. How badly she wanted that fish. Was Marvel being truthful or sly? Did he think Cato was nearby? Who could even see smoke at this distance? Prim, want to pass out the bread? Her shoulders slumped and she took the bread from Peter. Sure. Bread and berries. No fish. How silly of her to expect elaborate meals as they fought for survival in a forest. She was being selfish. I used to make goat cheese at home, she said, to lighten the mood. And to distract her fish-craving stomach. Whoopee. Marvel stuffed his entire serving of bread into his mouth in one go. It was from my goat, lady. Her throat closed. Who was milking Lady while she was gone? Surely Katniss was. Yes, Katniss would be. Katniss knew how much Prim loved Lady and Buttercup. Rue nibbled on her bread and Peter picked at his as though not hungry. That's the last of it. Prim almost choked on the words. After this, they'd have to find their food. Good thing there were fish in the river. Good thing there was a river at all or they'd die of dehydration. Better cook the fish then. Marvel gave a humorless laugh and tossed the berries into his mouth. Why are you so angry? Prim split her own piece of bread in half and tucked the other half in her coat pocket. Even though she wanted to eat it, she had other plans. Why are you so ditzy and smiley all the time, he retorted. She tried not to let it get to her. Because my mom raised me to be like this. Well, I was raised like this. What, brooding and wanting to kill people? How could anyone be raised with such a harsh personality? I was trained to kill children. Marvel said it as if to disgust her, but she already knew that much. He was a career. If this were on camera, he'd be in trouble. Tributes weren't supposed to train for the games. Would the Capitol kill him now because he said that? Does that mean you like killing people? You wouldn't understand. She lifted her chin. You're right, I don't understand how someone could want to kill someone else. Surely Marvel was lying. No one could enjoy death and murder. No one. I don't want to kill people, all right. I want to win the games and live in all the glory, and I'm willing to do anything for that. Including cutting that smile right off your perfect little face. His threats didn't bother her, but her heart sank like a wilted flower. What a tragic way to think and live. Why would you pursue being something you hate? That destroys the whole point of living. She shook her head and turned her back on him. No one else spoke. For a breath, Prim felt utterly alone. But then a small body plopped itself down next to her. Prim looked up and there sat Rue, smiling and holding out some extra berries. I'm glad we're together. Prim broke into a smile. Me too. 10 more minutes and then we've got to keep moving. Peter started assembling their things. Maybe, we can start a fire at our next stop. If it's still light enough. He was learning. He was learning safety out in the forest. Prim knew he'd barely strayed from his bakery, but he had a keen mind. Because of that, she knew they'd only grow stronger as a group, as a family, the longer the games went on. Once everyone was up and ready, Marvel looking the worst of the bunch, they continued on. Prim took the rear again, but this time she didn't mind. She had something she wanted to try. As they waded back into the river, she glanced back briefly to where she'd left her second half of bread resting on the stone she'd been sitting on. Whoever had followed her and Rue was hungry. And berries never filled anyone's stomach very much. It always left Prim's churning on a false empty feeling. Enemy or not, Cato or not, Prim hoped the tribute found her bread. And the note she scratched in the dirt beneath it. 22. I'm not your enemy. Prim. That's what Prim left in the dirt. The tribute might not even be following them anymore, but she knew better. And she finally had something else on which to focus her thoughts instead of Marvel's ribbing. When they made camp, the sun hadn't set yet and Prim was sure they were miles away from the cornucopia. Peter must have thought so, too, because he started a fire. Let's go get some roasting sticks. Rue squealed, hopping to her feet. Stay around here. Peter glanced between them and Marvel. Okay. Prim wanted to be close, just in case Marvel tried to hurt Peter, not that she could do much to help Peter, but still. She and Rue weaved behind the little rock cave they'd found and searched the ground for skewers. They were finally going to eat the fish. Prim had more fun gathering herbs and berries. Besides, Rue had an eye for useful branches. It's how I made my slingshot so quickly. Prim looked closer at the slingshot. The branch was sturdy and the elastic part was made of a rubber band. Where did you get the rubber band? Rue's smile slid from her face. Well, when I got into the forest, I didn't run toward the cornucopia or anything, there was a dead tribute girl. I didn't know who'd killed her, but she had a rubber band holding her hair back in a braid, so I stole it. She looked up at Prim as though waiting for a reprimand. Do you think that's okay? I don't see anything wrong with it. She slid a handful of tiny purple berries off a branch. I think that was really smart. Rue lit up. You do? Yeah. I wouldn't have thought of something like that. Prim would have fled the dead body on first sight. Rue nearly skipped through the forest after that. Prim threw a berry at her and they had a moment of giggles and berry throwing. Open your mouth and try to catch one. Prim obeyed and Rue's berry hit her in the eye. They collapsed in a fit of giggles. We better get back. K. Still giggling, they made their way back to camp, but not before Prim let half her berries fall out of her pocket for the tribute following them, if the tribute was still there. Prim would check the next day and see if the berries were eaten or not. The smoked fish was superb. Each of them got their own fish. Prim sprinkled some crushed thyme she'd found in the forest on the fish. The fire itself was luxury enough as night fell, but they had to put it out before it got too dark, otherwise it would be a beacon. Peter filled up the water bottle and walked back to the fire. What are you doing? Marvel asked. Peter rolled his eyes. Putting out the fire. Don't do it with water, idiot. Marvel launched to his feet and then doubled over, clutching his shoulder. Smoke's more obvious than the light. What do you suggest? Peter's tone was raised, but Prim didn't miss the desire to learn behind his question. In response, Marvel kicked a chunk of dirt onto the flames. Smother it. The moment Peter started helping him, Marvel sat back down. He'd helped all he wanted to. But even though he treated Peter rudely and he wouldn't help anymore, Prim noticed something that lifted her spirits. He didn't want to be found. Maybe he was coming around and realizing they were on his side. She left a portion of her fish up on a rock on the edge of camp before curling up next to Rue in their tiny cave. Peter still wouldn't allow Marvel to join them inside. Probably a wise move. Marvel's teeth flashed when he grinned. I'll take first watch. Peter plopped himself at the edge of the cave, facing outward. His back was to the girls and he watched Marvel closely, but Marvel just shoved a bunch of dead leaves into a pile and climbed into the pile. Sweet dreams, you psychos. The anthem played with no dead tributes to announce. An hour passed and Prim still couldn't fall asleep. She should have taken first watch so Peter could sleep. She tugged his jacket and he turned his head. Let's switch. I'll take first watch. No, Prim, you get some rest. She crawled out of her space and the rush of air that hit her as she pulled away from Rue's body heat made her shiver. In her sleep, Rue curled into a ball. Peter, I'll take watch, okay? You need to rest. You've been a really good leader. He sighed. I don't know, Prim. I don't really know what I'm doing. This whole thing just seems unwise. She sat down next to him and scooted close, trying to give him some of her own body heat. What do you mean? He rubbed his eyes. I don't know if I should really share it with you. She hung her head. It's because of Marvel and everything, isn't it? Kind of. He absently rubbed his hands together, as though working through a lump of dough. What do you think is going to happen? At the end of all this? The game makers won't let us keep building an alliance, especially when we're forcing an alliance. Prim's voice was quiet. I've tried not to think of what will happen. Because the truth was, all but one had to die. She only hoped she'd die first, under the illusion that a family in the games could work. Then she'd never have to see the aftermath. I think the people of the capital are going to get bored with all of our hiding and fleeing. There wasn't a death today. Something's going to happen soon and then all hell will break loose. He looked at her, the moonlight illuminating the frown between his eyes. Then what, Prim? What will happen to all of us when chaos hits? We'll take care of each other. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling more and more like a little sister again instead of a tribute. I'll take care of you, Peter. She heard his sigh. Felt his arm scoot around her as a support beam. Heard heavy breathing from both Marvel and Rue. If only Katniss were here, she'd know what to do. She'd have some sort of plan. But, if Katniss were here then that would be even worse for Peter. Much worse. Peter, Do you still love Katniss? The night sound seemed elevated, brought on by his silence. Perhaps she shouldn't have asked. What made her ask? How insensitive of her. Yes. Oh. What had Prim hoped? That maybe he stopped loving Katniss so that he could stop trying to protect Prim. But, whenever she imagined him loving Katniss, Prim couldn't help picturing him as her big brother. She couldn't see Gale as a big brother. He was, well, Gale. It was different. How much do you love her? Peter gave a humorless laugh. Isn't it obvious, Prim? He swept his arm in front of him, gesturing to the arena as a whole. I'd die for her. Then, in a quieter, broken voice weighted down by hopelessness. I'm going to die for her. 23. Morning came without punishment from the capital. Prim's shoulders stayed tense the whole time she changed Marvel's bandage. Something was coming. The air stung with a threat. Would it come from the capital? From other tributes? From Marvel? Peter crouched by the river, stabbing fish with Marvel's spear. He missed more than he killed one, but Prim was proud of him. She didn't want to be the one killing fish. 4 days, Rue chirped. We've survived 4 whole days. 3.5. Marvel pushed Prim's hands away. I'm fine, okay. Geez. She hurriedly tied off the bandage. There. That clean one would last him at least 2 more days. The wound was closing and there wasn't any sign of infection. Stay hydrated. She rinsed the old bandage in the creek, wringing out the blood and water until the wrung water ran clear. She set it out on a rock to dry, the same rock upon which she'd left her fish the previous night. It was gone. The tribute was still following them, and hadn't killed them in their sleep. It couldn't be Cato. Prim's stomach squirmed. She should tell Peter. He'd want to find out who was following. But what could they do? The person was clearly skilled in being silent while Peter was skilled at tramping through underbrush like an elephant. They couldn't hide from this tribute. The best Prim could do was hope the tribute would realize that they, Prim's new little tribute family, were the good guys. Well, she was still working on Marvel. So what did you do in your district? Rue asked Marvel as she gathered stones from the river bank for her sling. You don't know what the different districts do. Unfazed, she ditched a white rock and fished for a smaller one. Nope. We make jewels. Diamonds, emeralds, rubies. His voice took on a suave attitude, as though trying to woo whoever was listening. The beautiful things. For the beautiful people in the capital. His eyes searched the area around them, then stopped on a knot in one of the trees. He winked at it. Prim looked, but didn't see anyone. Winking at the camera won't get you more sponsors. Peter strung the fish on his belt. Oh, people care about me. They know I'm going to win, especially when I'm up against a bunch of tributes who won't kill me. He rotated his shoulder, testing its movement. I like it here. Rue finished gathering stones and then sat by Prim. It's a little bit like home. So many trees and mockingjays. She whistled her little tune again and the mockingjays echoed it. It's boring. Marvel lost his suave tone. Too boring for everyone watching. Trust me, I know the capital people. I'm practically one of them, we like the same things. Entertainment, jewels, beauty, I plan to give them what they want. A show. That's all they ever wanted. A show. And Marvel did seem to know how to play into their hands. Would he always and forever be acting? Things are a bit different in District 12, Prim chimed in, willing her voice to be strong. She didn't really want to talk about home, but it might help Marvel. We don't have much chance to see jewels or beautiful things, but we have our own values. She looked up and caught Marvel's eye. He seemed to look at her more often whenever she spoke. Family. Home. Unity. Those are jewels, too, for the heart. She expected an eye roll. A scoff. A jab. But Marvel just looked at her with a curious tilt to his head. Even though you don't feel it, she continued, I view you as part of my family. You, and Peter, and Rue. What about when I kill you? It didn't come out as a threat this time. The question was heavy, testing, more curious than anything else. Even then. I know I'm going to die in these games. And I plan to die among family. The scoffing Marvel returned and he laughed through his nose. You okay? But it was an act again. For a moment, she saw the real Marvel. Peter rose slowly to his feet. Do you guys hear anything? Prim's ears perked and caught a distant rushing noise. Louder than the river. She couldn't place it. I hear rushing. Crackling. Fire. Rue screamed and, as if to punctuate her shriek, a giant wall of fire burst into sight only a few yards off. Run. Peter hoisted the spear, grabbed Prim's arm, and pulled her toward the river. It's not deep enough. It barely reached her ankles, as though someone had drained it in mere seconds. Across, then. Peter's panic fed into her own, but not enough to make her forget about the others. She craned her neck, but didn't see Rue or Marvel. Where are they? We'll find them afterward. But even amidst the roaring, Prim could tell Peter wasn't certain, or even concerned. No time to worry. The wall was upon them, the heat singing her back as they ran. Tripped. Fled. No time to think. A fireball burst past them, grazing her ear and she screamed. Peter yelped and let go of her jacket for a mere second. In that second, she saw another fireball flying from the right. She dodged, her foot caught on a root, and she tumbled down a hill slope, head over heels, until her knee caught a tree stump and knocked her to a rough stop. She pushed up on all fours, looked at the top of the hill and saw, for a moment, Peter standing above, far away, with wide eyes and a cry on his lips. Too far to hear. The wall of fire sped toward him like a beast on wheels. Peter, she screamed. He rolled, but the fire swept over the place he'd been standing. A cannon boomed. A sob choked Prim even more than the firewall did. Peter. Peter. But she had no time to cry. Right now, she must survive. She didn't know why, but it was as if Katniss's voice urged her on. Be strong. Get up. Survive, Prim. She clawed her way up the trunk of the tree until she was standing, just as tongues of fire licked the place she once sat. She stumbled down the hill, running pell-mell through the forest, tears providing the only relief from the heat. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't do this. She couldn't survive. The heat was too much. It surrounded her. There was no path to take, no way of escape. She continued on, tears burning her eyes and smoke burning her lungs. The fire gave chase until her muscles wore down into jelly, spitting balls of fire that, by some miracle, continued to miss her. Where to go? Where could she hide? She didn't even know where she was. Rocks. Trees. Nothing. Down the hill she scurried. Stumbling once. Twice. Resorting to crawling as the fire arched over her, licking its lips and preparing to devour her. That's when she saw the cove in a small rock face. It was her only chance, the fire wouldn't follow her in there, would it? She crawled, sticks digging into her palms, tucked her arms, and rolled through the opening. It sloped and she bumped down the small escarpment until she finally skidded to a stop. She lay face down in the earth, tense. Waiting to be burned up. The fire didn't come. She coughed, sucking in clouds of dirt. More coughing. Choking. Vomiting a nasty black sludge. It looked similar to what the men from the mines would cough up before dying from coal dust. I'm going to die. She'd die like her father. How ironic. Black lungs. Tar for breath. Did the capital do this on purpose? To remind her of the horrors of home before sending her to her doom. Air. Oxygen. Each gasp brought an extra spoonful of the sweet breath into her lungs. Maybe she'd be okay. Maybe that one hurl of sludge was all that was in her. To help herself calm, she imaged bright pink healthy lungs, expanding and contracting as she breathed. The lungs ushered in control, sending pep talks through her body, urging her muscles to wake up. It worked. Her heartbeat calmed, her breathing steadied, and from what she could tell the fire had disappeared. Well, look who's here. Prim scrambled onto her back, scuttling away from the voice until her eyes settled on the figure in the shadow. Out stepped Marvel, covered in soot, dirt, and sweat. He wasn't breathing hard, so he must have gotten here quite a bit sooner than she did. She must have run a roundabout way to the cave. That was the only way he could have beaten her. "Oh Marvel, you're alive." The relief poured from her voice and ended in a sob. "It's just you, I think." Sniff. "Peter, Peter." She choked and fought a coughing fit. "The fire got him. He's dead. And you will be too, in a minute." Only then did Prim notice Marvel clutched a knife, Peter's knife with the jagged edging near the handle and the long smooth blade edge catching a glint of light from the cave entrance. The relief went out of her. Even the sorrow and grief disappeared. But they weren't replaced by fear. Resignation took their place. Oh. This felt like such betrayal. She knew he was dangerous and that he'd been raised with killing skill and without compassion. But she'd come to view him as family, no matter how foolish it was. She imagined the Capitol people leaning toward their screens, waiting for him to leap forward and plunge the dagger into her chest. Oh, it would be horrible. What a slow death, a stab wound. Not that. The camera would watch her choke. Marvel might stab her twice. Poor Katniss would be at home, sobbing over Prim's death, having to watch the whole thing, pleading for the cannon boom to just end it all. Marvel stepped toward her. "Wait." She held up a hand, but made no other movement. "Please, Marvel, will you just slit my throat? It'd be faster. I won't fight, I promise." She tucked her hands under her back as though to prove her point. She wouldn't fight him. In this, she had to be strong. "Get your hands where I can see them." He jabbed the air with the knife. She brought them back out, palms up. Poor Marvel. She couldn't blame him. His people did this to him. Maybe, if he won the games, he'd go on to learn about compassion and family and love. Oh, she hoped so. He swooped down and brought the dagger to her throat. She released a pent-up breath and closed her eyes. "Thank you. Thank you." A quick death. Her eyes flew back open. Wait, Marvel, just one more second." In small, non-threatening movements, she shrugged out of her jacket. Half of it was burned away, but it still had a lot of use. She pushed it into his lap. "You'll need this, if you continue alone. It's cold at night and I don't want it to get covered in blood." It was silly, but she wanted to be of some use, even when dead. His fierce narrowed eyes held her gaze. She tried to look past his anger and determination, but it was too much. She closed her eyes and imagined home, imagined Katniss's smiling eyes when she called Prim little duck. She imagined Buttercup purring and Lady bleating when Prim hugged her too tightly. "Stop it." He pressed the dagger against her soft skin with jerky, forceful movements. "Stop it." Warmth trickled down the side of her neck, under the collar of her shirt. "Stop what?" What was she doing? Whatever it was. "I'm sorry." He released a primal yell, the loudest, angriest yell she'd ever heard come from a man. She tensed, cringing against what was sure to come, but the cold metal left her throat. She opened her eyes. He shoved her against the stone of the cave. Hard enough so the rocks bit into her spine. But then he stood up and pointed the knife at her, his eyes blazing with deep hatred, fury, confusion, and rage. "I don't get it. I just don't get it." He ducked out the cave, leaving her coat discarded on the ground. 25. Prim lay panting in the cave, ignoring the warm blood seeping from the small wound on her neck. She heard Marvel's cursing as he left the cave behind. More than anything she felt guilt. Why? Her actions were tearing Marvel apart. They got Peter killed. And who knew where Rue was? Was Prim doing the right thing? She stared at the opposite side of the cave for 10 long seconds, then scrambled to her feet and ran after Marvel, snatching her coat from the ground as she went. She needed to find the rest of her tribute family. Meaning, Rue. But there was Marvel. What would happen with him? He didn't kill her. He wouldn't kill her. And she loved him dearly for it, not romantically, but a fierce loyal trust. Some might find it odd that she could trust him after he just jammed a knife against her throat, but, for some reason, she did. She caught up to him. He crashed through the singed bushes, shoving branches aside and taking no care to be quiet. The fire was gone now. Perhaps the capital couldn't allow it to kill more than one tribute. Peter. A sob rose in Prim's throat. This was her fault. All her fault. Marvel turned his head barely. She knew he noticed her, but he said nothing. Neither did she. They tramped through the woods for a good half hour, Prim sucking in desperate breaths against her sore lungs. With each step, Marvel seemed to grow madder. Before he exploded, Prim figured she ought to break the tension. "Where are you going?" "Away from you," he spat. It stung, but Prim plunged on. "I'd like to stay with you, if I could." "Do what you want." She didn't dare mention trying to find Rue. Instead, she whistled Rue's little four-note call and let the mockingjays carry it where they may. Perhaps Rue would hear it and know that Prim was alive. It didn't take long before Marvel lost energy. Running from a wall of fire with a shoulder wound taxed him. He stumbled and steadied himself against a tree. "How about we stop and try to eat something?" Prim wanted to check his wound, but she didn't think he'd appreciate her bringing that up just yet. "Shut up." She did. He kept walking. Her own energy faded and, with it, her mental strength. Against her will, her thoughts drifted back to Peter over and over. She pictured him up on that hill, looking at her with wide eyes. The wall of fire descending on him. Him dropping to the ground and then the cannon booming. Her eyes burned. Marvel finally stopped, stuck his knife in the ground, and settled himself against a log. Prim sat across from him, biting back the tears. It didn't work. They streamed down her cheeks, the traitors. Traitors. Was she a traitor? A traitor to Katniss? A traitor to her district? Without a word, she moved toward Marvel and reached for his shoulder bandage. He shoved her away and she fell backward onto her hands. They stung. Only then did she realize they were burned and scraped from her race through the woods. "It needs tending." He ripped the knife from the ground. "It's fine." "Why won't you let me?" "Because you made me look weak." His eyes blazed and his voice bounced around the forest, startling the birds. "I'm a dead man now, don't you get it?" Her tears came faster, but she refused to allow a sob to break free. "Why?" His voice came out hollow. "I've failed my district. I'm wounded, I didn't kill you, I'm weak to them. No sponsor will send me a single parachute, no matter how far I make it in the games now. It's up to Glimmer to bring pride to District 1. Pride. That was their crown. What an empty victory. Why are you crying?" He shot a glare at her. Prim hastily wiped her tears and looked away. She didn't want to share with him. She didn't want another jab from his words. "Your neck's bleeding." She raised her fingers to the spot where he cut her. It wasn't bleeding anymore, the blood had dried. "It's fine. Fine." He laid his head back against the log and closed his eyes. At first, Prim thought he was just taking a breather, but after a few minutes she realized he was going to sleep. "What about the careers?" Marvel shrugged. That was that. He didn't care if they got caught and killed. Prim's stomach growled, but night was falling and she didn't have enough light to find berries. She wept silently for a good hour, cursing and questioning herself. Had she already become a monster by allowing Peter to die for her? And possibly Rue. And now, Marvel. Who am I anymore? Marvel slumped to his side, rolling over until he was tight against the log. Prim shrugged off her jacket, despite the cold. She didn't deserve to be warm. She'd slept many heatless nights before. This would be no different. Instead, she laid it carefully over Marvel. She didn't want him to wake and catch her doing it. He'd be angry. She scooped together a pile of leaves at the base of a nearby tree and burrowed beneath them. They brought hardly any insulation, but they did stop some of the wind. She sniffed against her arm, trying to stop crying. It was stupid, really. Peter knew he'd die. She'd just wanted to die first. The anthem started, blaring into the night. She didn't look at the sky. She didn't want to see Peter's face. Then again, she wanted to bid him one last farewell, see his smile and try to convince herself he was, truly, in a better place. At least death by the firewall was fast. She peeked through her fingers, squinting one eye until the sky screen came into view. The anthem was almost over, but not before she saw. Only one face illuminated the sky before the end of the anthem, claiming the day's single cannon boom. It glowed against the black backdrop. And it wasn't Peter. 26. I want to kill Seneca Crane. With my bare hands. Sending a wall of fire into Peter and Prim's camp was completely unnecessary. But when I look at it from the game maker's point of view, it makes sense. Drive them all closer. Drive the weak ones, my duck and her ridiculous tribute family, back toward Cato and the others. Because cannons are music to the capital's ears. Today has been hell. First, the wall of fire, then the cannon that practically stopped my heart. I swore it was Peter until Gale, with a roll of his eyes, pointed to the tribute picture in the right-hand corner of our screen. The girl from District 4. I wasn't even keeping track of her. What was her name? The camera stayed on Prim and Peter the whole time. Second, that run-in with Marvel. I thought for sure Prim would be dead, and I broke down weeping the moment Marvel put that knife against her throat. Gale wrapped an arm around my shoulders. He knew as well as I did that she was dead. I didn't even have energy to be mortified by my reaction. But Marvel didn't kill Prim. It makes no sense. I don't get it. He's not the merciful type. None of the careers are. Why didn't he kill her? I can't understand his thinking, no matter how I try. I suppose, if it had been me with a knife to little Rue's throat, maybe I wouldn't have done it. But Marvel isn't me. He's so different than I am, yet I felt like I understood him. Up until that point. I'm not complaining. Aside from the fact I'm still freaked that my little duck decided to follow the psycho killer from District 1, the real problem is Peter. Peter is burned. Bad. When he rolled away from that fire, he tumbled into some dry creek bed. He let himself fall, somersaulting down the tiny ravine, weaving wherever it took him until he was finally safe. But that fire swept over his leg and burned the skin to a nasty black crisp in mere seconds. He'll be dead by morning. Gale, always picking on Peter, has sat beside me most days during the games, after he's gone hunting. I still haven't been able to pull myself away from the screen long enough to go kill something. Maybe I should. Probably. I try to sound nonchalant, like I don't care much about Peter, but both he and I know it's a show. I need Peter to live. Somewhere, deep in a confused corner of my heart, I want him to live. Not just for Prim. This whole jumbled mindset sucks. Yesterday at the Hob, people gave much more than I'd expected. Probably because I was so desperate and honorless in my begging. But they knew my father, they respected father. And everyone, I mean everyone, loves Prim. Who couldn't? Even when she's being the little healer in the games of death. It's sweet. It's different. It's Prim. I took the money to the governor of District 12. He's the one who handles sending funds to Haymitch. It brings me no comfort knowing that money is in Haymitch's hands. I don't know him at all, but I'm betting that drunk isn't doing squat for Prim or Peter. Thankfully, Madge's father assured me that Haymitch can't spend the money on anything but parachutes. So why have Peter and Prim not received a parachute yet? Now they will. I got them funds. I did something. For once, I don't feel so helpless. That is, until I focus on the screen again and see Prim trailing behind Marvel. Hurry Haymitch. Help Peter. I fold my arms tight, as if I can still my frantic heart. Hurry Peter, go save my sister. If he can't do it, if he can't save Prim, I at least want him to be the victor. When he first declared his love for me on national television, I hated him and I didn't care. And he was right, if Prim died and he lived I'd be furious and I'd hate him. But I see what he's going through. I see how hard it is to keep Prim safe while she makes decisions that put her life in danger but preserve her character. He's doing all he can, more than I ever could have hoped for when Prim's name came out of that giant fishbowl. So Peter's wrong. I won't hate him if he survives. 27. Prim's gasp echoed through the darkness. Marvel startled awake and leapt to his feet, knife in hand. Prim leaned away from him, rustling the leaves covering her. He moved toward her, high on alert. Did he think she was an enemy in the camp? It's me, she squeaked. His posture slackened. No one else is around. Not that I know of. He plopped back on the ground. Great. He didn't sound happy about it. Did he want to fight? Pete and Rue are alive. Her family, still intact. Yuppie. With that, he rolled over and went back to sleep. Prim wanted to nudge him awake, to ask if they could go search for Peter and Rue the next morning, but she held her tongue. She shouldn't push her luck with Marvel. As she closed her eyes, a flutter of nerves hit her heart. What if she had to choose? What if Marvel wouldn't join her in finding Peter and Rue? Would she have to choose between him and the others? The more she thought about it, the more she was certain he wouldn't agree to it. Underscore 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 underscore. Prim woke to footsteps. She opened her eyes and the glare of morning sun blinded her, though not before she saw Marvel walking away. She scrambled to her feet, groggy. Every movement shot aches through her body. Marvel, where are you going? He didn't stop. Didn't even seem to hear her. She slung her pack over her shoulder and scrambled after him, finally catching up. My, his pace was fast. Where are you going? Was he really trying to leave her? I'm going to get a spear. Her shock stuck in her throat. At the cornucopia. No response, just more walking. She reached forward and grabbed his arm. Marvel. He yanked his arm out of her grip. Don't talk to me. Just leave. This could be her chance. No one would blame her for walking away. He didn't want her here. She couldn't even blame herself. You could only pursue a person so much before they rejected love or affection or family. But wasn't that the definition of family? Love. Perseverance. Not giving up, no matter how much hate the other person conveyed. I'm not leaving you, Marvel. Her voice was calm and soft. In speaking that way, the calmness drifted into her heart, too. It's like someone, God, maybe, orchestrated this perfectly. Peter would probably find Rue first. This way he was free of his obligation to protect Prim and instead he could protect and take care of Rue. That left Prim to stay with Marvel. Of everyone in her tribute family, he needed help the most. Even if he wouldn't admit it. I'm coming with you. He slapped aside a bush branch. Then you'll die. The words didn't bother her, not in the slightest. Okay. They walked for an hour before the growls of their stomachs became too loud to travel safely. Without being asked, Prim went in search for berries, nuts, and plants. She kept her ears attentive to Marvel's movements, though, because she'd hate to lose him. He wouldn't come find her if they got separated. It was up to her to stick with him. He couldn't even forage on his own. He'd starve without her. This thought, at least, made her feel purposeful and less like a burden. Prim reached a berry bush and picked for only a couple minutes, but it was sparse. Too sparse. Almost like someone had stripped this one already. It could be a bear, but the bears ate leaves and all in their attempts to get to the sweet fruits. It had to be a tribute. The strand of long hair resting among the middle of the bush, snagged in a small thorn, confirmed it. With a trembling hand, Prim picked it up and held it to the light. Red. Long. Female. Both Prim's and Marvel's hair was blonde. How old was this strand of hair? Was Prim's hungry friend back? Following them, maybe. Just in case, after Prim had finished gathering what she could, she left a small pile of nuts, berries, mint, and edible roots in the shape of a heart. She liked having this secret, a secret communication with another tribute. No one else knew, well, no one else except the entire world watching on TV. But for some reason, They didn't feel real. Prim never felt watched. She couldn't imagine herself being interesting enough to garner screen time. She wasn't doing the games the way the Capitol wanted tributes to. It took her 10 whole minutes to find Marvel again. She became a true tracker, watching for footprints and following them. Stopping to listen for noise until she finally found him, traveling slowly, through the woods. "Here's some food." She stepped up behind him. He startled and whipped out his dagger. "Oh. It's you." So he had meant to leave her. "Aren't you hungry?" In response, he held out his hand. "Sure." She filled it with the goods and munched on some herself. It didn't feel like enough. Her stomach would never be satisfied. Part of her spared a thought for the small pile of food she'd left behind for the other tribute. Hopefully it wasn't wasted. "Now leave me alone. I told you I was coming with." He pushed her shoulder. "I don't need you. I don't want you with. You put me in danger, don't you get it?" She opened and closed her mouth twice. How do I do that? Wasn't she helping gather food? Didn't she save his life? Tend his wound? He rounded on her. "I can't go back to Cato's camp with you hanging around." Instead of fear, her heart melted into a glimmer of joy. He feared for her. He feared that Cato would kill her. He did care. "I'm not afraid of Cato." Easy to say now, but would she feel the same when she faced the machete-wielding muscled tribute by the end of the day? "I don't care how you feel. I can't go in there if you're acting like my pet. They'll wonder why I didn't kill you. No one in their right mind would team up with you. They won't trust me. They're my last hope at this. They don't know how I screwed up. So leave me alone and give me a chance at survival, would you?" Prim was wrong. Marvel didn't care. He cared only about being accepted by the other careers. Killers. He still wanted to be a killer. What if they don't trust you anyway, Marvel? What if they just kill you? We're too deep in the games now for them to care much about teaming up. I'll take that chance. But why? Desperation coursed through her. Why take that chance? Peter has your old spear. We can find him, he won't kill you. Then you'll have your spear and then what? His shout bounced from tree to tree, like a gong. How close were they to Cato's group? Would Marvel be heard? Then what? "I just tramp around with you and your little group. Your little family." He sneered. "I'm not the family type." "But what about Glimmer? She's from your district. Don't you care about her at all?" "I'm not the caring type." He sounded less confident this time. He jerked the hem of his coat to straighten it, but Prim caught him wincing and rolling his wounded shoulder. "May I check your shoulder bandage?" She inwardly cringed, waiting for his outburst. Instead, he paused in his walking and stared into the distant trees. Thinking. "Yeah. That'd be good." His voice sounded strange. "Kind. Too kind. Fake. I think it needs to be changed, actually." He turned to her and Prim took a step back. Why did her body react like that? Marvel's face seemed normal, harsh and emotionless. So what had happened to his voice? Still, if he was asking her to change his bandage, she'd happily comply. She dropped her pack to the ground, opened it and rummaged inside for one of the cleaned bandages. That's when something slammed against the back of her head and she blacked out. 28. Hammers. Hammers in her head. Miners' hammers, drowning out all sound. Blackness. Prim groaned. Even that sent a course of agony through her skull. Light filtered through her sore, thin eyelids. Blink. Ouch. Blink blink. Trees. Blink. A face. Prim shot to a sitting position, but fell back almost immediately, dizzy. Her head hit the ground and she yelped. Her fingers reached to the back of her head and felt a lump larger than one of her slingshot pebbles. Then, as if remembering why she startled, she forced her eyes open all the way. Whoever had been hovering over her had scrambled away like a skittish kitten. Prim's eyes finally focused on the crouched form ready to spring, or flee. A girl. The girl tribute from District 5. What was her name again? She had red hair, a pointed nose, and freckles. She looked like a little fox, a startled, scared, timid fox. A familiar feeling rose in Prim, the type she got when she found a stray animal to bring home, like a baby squirrel or abandoned bird. She'd never had this feeling toward a person before, especially not a person who was clearly 2 or 3 years older than her.